We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com.
Welcome to another edition of AVRant. My name is Rob H, and this week I'm here with...
Lee Overstreet, AVRant pinch hitter, or I guess since we're post-World Series now, I should be something other than pinch hitter. I don't know what else, like substitute kind of thing.
The substitute sounds so generic. That's
pinch hitter. Well, we'll stick with it.
Pinch hitter works. Yes.
Well, I mean, one of those World Series games lasted so long, it's almost the next season now.
I didn't watch it, but I heard about it. I saw people on Twitter tweeting about the length of that game. So
I watched it just for the sheer statistical improbability of it. It was fascinating. There was lots of jokes to be had that night about the passage of time.
Statistics and baseball do go hand in hand.
They do, yeah.
Well, Lee, thank you very, very much for coming in. This was short notice. Tom let me know this morning that one of his sons is very, very under the weather. So he is doing his fatherly duties and taking care of his kid. And coming up in the news, I'll explain why tomorrow night would not have worked for me recording, and Tom will not be available during the day. And then, of course, Wednesday is Halloween, so that wasn't going to work for anybody.
No, because then you have to turn off all your lights and hide from the children.
Right, so it was vital that we record AVRant's episode tonight on a Monday, and thankfully, Lee said he was available for at least a good, lengthy portion of it. You might need to skip out a little bit early, but that's okay.
You know, one of these days I need to calculate the amount of lead time you guys give me and see what the average is. There was one time you gave me like a week and I still didn't do a very good job. But most of the time, it's like in the 5-hour range.
This was not the shortest ever. I know it is not the shortest ever, but
I think like an hour and a half was the shortest ever.
This is within one day. So yes, very much thank you to Lee Overstreet. And yes, Tom Andrea, of course, is the regular host of this podcast, but he is away this week, so I am being lead host, I guess. I don't know.
Sure, you're lead host, and I'm color commentator. That's all I can really offer tonight. Is I hope I ask very good questions of you.
Right. Well, I didn't have much time to prepare, so this is going to be a fun episode. But yes, let's start it off by letting everybody know that you can, of course, send your questions. This is a Q&A home theater podcast, so you can send your questions to question@avrant.com. That is our email address. Please do send your questions there. That is by far the easiest way for us to gather them up and have them on our topic list for every week. But there are other ways to contact us. You can reach us on Facebook. That's facebook.com/AVRant podcast. Yep, that's correct. Yeah, I got that right. We are on YouTube, of course. That's youtube.com/AVRant. No podcast on the end of that one. And of course, you can come to our website. That is avrant.com. And you can leave a comment there. Tom says the comments are working again. So I guess somebody could leave a comment there.
There have been issues, right, with the website? I'm about 1.5 shows behind. I missed last week.
The website is still up and kicking here at the end of the month, so I'm thinking 2A fixed it, and very much thanks to 2A if he did so, but it's still alive at the moment, so that's good. You can also reach Tom and myself individually. We have our email addresses. He is tom@avrant.com. I am rob@avrant.com, and we have Twitter addresses as well. He is at AVRant_Tom, and I am at FirstReflect, FirstReflect. And folks can reach Lee on Twitter as well, right?
Yes, you can. My last name is Overstreet, so my Twitter handle is Lee Overtweet.
It rhymes.
I'm so funny.
Yep. It's just going to perpetually be a fantastic pun.
I love it. I was so proud of that handle when I got it back in the day. I really was. That's so good.
So now that you know how to reach us, we want to make sure we thank our listeners of the week. Those are folks who support the podcast in some way. One way you can do that is financially by going to avrant.com. Over on the right-hand side, there is a support the podcast button, and that'll just take you to PayPal, where you can, of course, make a donation using your PayPal account, or you can just use a credit card. You don't have to have a PayPal account to do that. I don't actually know if anybody donated this week, because Tom is the only one who sees that, and he didn't update the topic list. So it's possible somebody donated that I don't know about. If so, we will for sure mention your name next week when Tom is back. But another way that you can support us financially is via Patreon. So that's patreon.com/AVRant podcast. And that is an automatic monthly donation. You say how many dollars you would like to donate automatically every month. And that's just taken from your account and sent over to us, or at least a good portion is.
Or how many kilodollars? I like to use the term kilodollars.
That'd be all right. I'd be very happy with that. $1 per month is the minimum, so that's a pretty good deal. $12 a month for this podcast. And we have 75 patrons over there now. Mark R is one of our newest ones, and thanks very much to all 75 patrons over there.
Yes, thank you guys very, very much. And whoever won that $1.6 billion lottery, I hope you're an AV fan.
That would be
we can
awesome.
help you. Yeah, just throw a little bit of that.
I will take 0.1% of $1.6 billion, and that is still very healthy.
I could live really well.
But you do not have to support the podcast financially to be a listener of the week. Support us in some way. One great way is to let manufacturers or retailers know that products that we recommended are the reason that you bought it over there. Infinite Gary, one of our regular listeners, he did just that. He ordered some Belden speaker wire from Blue Jeans Cable, and he let them know that we often recommend them, and the person he spoke to over at Blue Jeans knew about AVRant. So that's nice. That's good to know.
Now that's really neat. So that wasn't the first time he heard about us. That's
it must not. Yes.
Maybe the person he spoke to is a listener. That would be cool.
That would be very awesome.
Yes, it would.
So would you like me to go through the news, or would you like to hit up the news?
I can go through the news.
That sounds good. I've been talking too much already. I'll take a sip of my
That's
Pepsi.
okay. I learned to read years ago. Turner and Warner Brothers Digital Networks have decided to shut down FilmStruck, a thing most of you haven't heard of. The classic, independent, and difficult-to-find streaming movie service that was also home to the Criterion Channel, where you could stream Criterion Collection movies, including the special features. FilmStruck will go offline November 29th, so you got 1 month. Criterion themselves made a statement that they will try to find an alternative way to keep their library online. Now, I know Criterion Collections from back in the Laserdisc days and some DVD stuff, and I guess here we are still active in streaming. I just find it fascinating that, number one, I hadn't heard of that, and I also find it fascinating as to why that needed to be a separate thing in the first place. Why couldn't the movies that are on that service just be on Netflix or Prime?
Well, Criterion used to be on Netflix, and then they decided to partner up with Turner and Warner Brothers and launch their own streaming service. So maybe Criterion will go back to Netflix.
Yeah,
I wouldn't
just
be
go back to
opposed to that. People are wondering why Criterion hasn't made the move over to Ultra HD Blu-ray yet, because they have not. They haven't released anything.
Now, that's weird.
A little bit, but as some people have speculated, it's because Ultra HD Blu-rays have no region codes. And when they're dealing with independent and foreign language films and stuff like that, sometimes there are restrictions where they aren't allowed to release them in all, and then Ultra HD Blu-ray has no region code, so there's no way to enforce it.
Is everyone working on those region codes? Are they all over 80? I don't understand. We've had the internet for... The first time I ever downloaded video that, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't have, must have been 20 years ago? Has to be 2 decades ago. Do they not know how this works yet? Why do we have region codes?
They still think the way people pirate discs is by copying the HDMI output, you know, in real time.
That's a pain.
That's how they think it works. But yeah, so a little bit sad to see FilmStruck go, although it was never available to me in Canada, so that was also a problem. But yeah, so yeah, service that some people might have been interested, you're now hearing about it now that it's gone.
Oh, well, but maybe keep an eye out, because Criterion Collections were the fanciest of laser discs back in the day. The finest picture quality and so forth. Okay, more news. Sony revealed the full 20-game lineup for their PlayStation Classic mini console. That's cool. Yeah,
they had said 5 games originally, and people were wondering, well, what are the other 15? So they finally said all of them. I did put in a pre-order in case this was something I wanted, because of course these little mini consoles always sell out before Christmas. But honestly, looking at the games list, I'm like, yeah, I think I'm gonna cancel that pre-order. I'm gonna see if my nephew wants one for sure for Christmas or not. But I don't think that's a system I need myself.
Yeah, I mean, I love mini systems; they're adorable. But I don't know.
We're not going to name all 20 games right now. You can Google it, or we'll have the link. Stuff that we talk about, we have the link over at avrant.com when this posts on Fridays. So you can see all 20 games there.
Oh, and Rob's going to be a guest on the Entertainment 2.0 podcast this week to talk about Dolby Vision, IMAX Enhanced, and different ways of handling HDR10. That'll be worth listening to.
Hopefully. Hopefully we're not over-promising and under-delivering, but yeah, I always have a great time over there talking with Josh Pollard and Richard Gunther. I do enjoy the Entertainment 2.0 podcast. That's part of the Digital Media Zone. So yeah, I'm going to be a guest this week. I'll tweet out the link and post it on Facebook for sure. So yeah, hopefully it'll be enjoyable. Excellento.
Now we're moving on to the comments section of our podcast. Infinite Gary just wanted to recommend Dolby's Conversations with Sound Artists podcast. This does look very interesting, or rather sounds very interesting. It's a audio podcast, although you can get it on YouTube.
That's right.
It's an informative series of conversations with Academy Award nominated sound editors and sound mixers. Those are the ones that get their awards at 5 o'clock in the morning. Talking about the process of building the soundscapes we've heard in Hollywood movies. And that's really cool.
Yeah,
I would just like to sit in the room for that, wouldn't you?
Well, that's kind of what this is, though, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I'd like to see it too, but
I see, for the actual process of the.
Yeah, I would love to just sit in the back of the room and be quiet and watch them do it. That would be very fun.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to listen through all of these yet. I just took a small little sample in that, but it definitely sounds like a quality podcast, interesting people that they're talking to, so that's cool. Always on the lookout for great podcasts that are related to our whole home theater obsession, so that's great. Thank you, Gary.
I saw one, it was very specifically about audio for documentaries. That kind of weirdly sounded interesting to me. Moving on, Andy wanted to share that for him at least. Atmos speakers really don't need to be expensive. See, this is a guy after my own heart. I'm sort of the garage sale guy on this podcast. I come on every now and then to remind you can go buy stuff at the thrift store. But not quite thrift store stuff we're talking about here. Atmos speakers don't have to be expensive. They don't have to match what you already have. He's got Paradigm speakers in a white finish. He didn't want to mount any speakers, so he was going for upward firing Atmos modules, which I might do one day. And instead of dedicated modules, he thought he'd give the Focal Little Birds a try, but he had trouble getting them in the white finish. So, on a lark, he bought a pair of $30 Acoustic Audio A321W Cube speakers from Amazon. Just some little, unassuming Cube speakers. He stuck some Velcro strips on them and pointed them straight up on top of his Paradigm speakers. Why not? You know, I mean,
hey, $30. What's the harm possibly going to be?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't like them, throw them in the trash. And for occasional Atmos objects, he says that very inexpensive setup is performing beyond his expectations. So for anyone wondering about Atmos, literally give anything a try. Just like any speakers you have, set them on top of your main speakers and aim them at the ceiling and see what happens.
Call them Dolby modules and see what happens. I mean, hey, I'm not opposed to that at all. I mean, performing beyond the expectations of what you expected for $30 per pair speakers that are aiming straight up, that might have been very low expectations. So it might not be, I'm parsing the language on that. But
to me, the one thing that would be important is to not have particularly wide dispersion speakers. You want them to get up and bounce off the ceiling. So
that's supposedly what they're doing. I still strongly suspect that it's pretty much all just down to the frequency alterations in EQ that calling them Dolby upward firing speakers in your AV receiver, it gives them a very distinctive dip in the frequency response to mimic a head related transfer function. I still think that's
hey, just for fun, build you a little horn-shaped like cone thing out of construction paper and wrap it around those speakers.
The $15 speaker each.
Yeah, wrap it around the $15 speaker and put some Scotch tape on it. Aim it at the ceiling. Just why not? I mean, what else you doing tonight? You know.
Well, that's good news, Andy. And yeah, we'll have the link to those speakers if anyone else wants to drop off $30 and give them a try.
I mean, honestly, I love that sort of thing. I think it's great. All right, so we're addressing questions from last week now, and then we'll see how many of this week we can get to before I cry uncle and run away. All right, so Steve H. has a Marantz SR7010 receiver, and he came across something in the manual that has him concerned that he might have been listening to Dolby True HD and Atmos signals with dynamic range compression applied for the past few years. In the settings, in the audio section, under surround parameters, there's a setting called Loudness Management. The footnotes say that this setting only applies to Dolby signals. By default, it's on, and the manual says that having it on lets you adjust the dynamic compression setting and activate Dolby's dialogue normalization. So the next setting is the dynamic compression setting, again, only for Dolby signals, and by default, that's set to off except for True HD and Atmos signals. For True HD and Atmos, dynamic compression is set to auto by default, and the description says it will automatically apply dynamic range compression, quote, according to the source, unquote. And so his question, so are these default settings anything to be worried about? Should he manually turn dynamic compression off, or for both True HD and Atmos, should he turn the loudness management off so that dynamic compression isn't even an option? It is confusing when it doesn't explain what is meant by according to the source. And so that makes me wonder what in the source is telling it to do what for those True HD and Atmos signals.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this is a setting I've never really touched. I mean, so to answer sort of his last question first,
right.
I wouldn't turn the loudness management off completely. That's the first part of this, was the loudness management. The dynamic compression is a subset of the loudness management setting. So I wouldn't turn the loudness management off, because to me, dialogue normalization is a useful feature. It is only in Dolby signals, but particularly like if you have a cable box, that's all going to be Dolby Digital 5.1. And to me, the dialogue normalization signal in that is kind of important, because that's the thing that prevents the commercials from sounding way, way louder than the regular television program.
So there's literally something in the signal telling that receiver what exactly to do.
A little bit, yeah. So Dolby's dialogue normalization, basically everything that's in the Dolby signal is supposed to say, here is the average dialogue level, and it evens that out.
All right, all right.
So if you're a commercial and you pegged the dialogue level at the loudest the signal can possibly be, which is what they often do in TV commercials, it'll bring that down automatically to be the same loudness as the dialogue during the TV show you were just watching. And
now as I understand it, I thought there was actually a law implemented through the FCC about that they passed a few years ago, at least in this country.
Yeah.
And it did make some difference. There's still sort of fudgy ways around it.
Yeah.
But it was, if I remember correctly, it was one of the most popular laws ever passed by Congress, which isn't saying much with our Congress.
Kind of need it for streaming now, because there's no such law for streaming, and you'll notice that the ads on streaming services are often much louder than the show you were just watching.
That's right.
But that's the idea behind Dolby's dialogue normalization. For that reason, I would leave the loudness management part of it on. Now, this dynamic compression setting, so first of all, by default, it's off for everything other than True HD and Atmos. So for a regular Dolby Digital or Dolby Digital Plus, that's not a worry. Now, yeah, the language of according to the source, it will automatically apply dynamic range compression. I mean, that suggests that however this was mastered, the True HD or the Atmos signal was mastered, they're intending for it to have some amount of dynamic range compression. I mean, the manual settings are like low, medium, and high.
What confuses me is why would there be a separate bit of data telling your receiver to compress it when they would just compress it in the signal? I don't understand.
Yeah, the original master just doesn't contain the dynamic range. It is odd. Like I say, it's not a setting I've changed. I mean, who knows? Maybe changing it would like help, say, Thor Ragnarok with its horrible dynamic range compression on the Ultra HD Blu-ray release. I don't think so, because people have analyzed the signal and there just isn't much dynamic range in the original signal. And
they just didn't do a good job.
That's just pulling it straight off the disc. That's not going through a Dolby True HD or an Atmos decoder first. So, yeah, I mean, I guess obviously there's no harm in experimenting with it.
Right.
My suspicion is that you probably aren't ever going to notice between having it auto versus off. I would expect you would notice if you manually set it to, say, high dynamic range compression, so that it is, dynamically compressing the dynamic range of everything that's a Dolby
Clearly,
signal.
You would expect a difference there. I would say, find you a couple of different scenes, and if there's a way to set your player to play one scene over and over, like find one scene that has a lot of prominent dialogue with quiet backgrounds, and maybe one where the dialogue's buried in a bunch of Thor Ragnarok noise, and listen to it with it on auto, listen to it with it on, listen to it with it off, and just see. Yeah, I mean, what can it hurt? I mean,
I wouldn't be worried about it. I wouldn't be fretting about it, and I honestly, I'm not entirely sure what they're doing with that little. I mean, it gives them the option, I suppose. It is a strange thing why they would, if this is the dynamic range we want, why wouldn't we just encode it that way originally? It is an odd thing to do.
What is auto versus on? Like, how would it detect that it wanted to do it?
Well, I mean, manually putting it to low, medium, high is obviously
that makes sense.
Compressing the dynamic range, but
But what's auto? What's
auto
it
is
looking for?
according to what's in the source.
Maybe it's another decision making on its part, right?
Well, it would have to be some little flag in the actual code itself. So, I mean, honestly, setting it to off, I don't see how that could ever be a problem. So that probably is the safest choice. I mean, off is the default for Dolby Digital and Dolby Digital Plus. So, that's an interesting question, Steve. It is a good detail to have found. And, I would certainly experiment with it. No harm in that. And I don't see how turning it off could be a problem, but I would leave loudness management on for the dialogue normalization.
See, so far the whole show is encouraging experimentation, little speakers and change your settings. Why not, man?
Well, for things that don't cost money, I am perfectly fine saying, yes, let's experiment.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Rob K. Rob says, thanks for discussing his setup, where his couch is up against his back wall and his left wall. His TV is on a partial front wall with a big opening to the right. And that's understating it. It's the whole rest of the room he's sort of in
to the right.
A nook.
Yes.
Yeah, the whole thing. So he wants an RO3D speaker configuration using SVS speakers all around. Okay. He checked with SVS. And they were in full agreement about using prime elevation speakers up high as his front height and rear height speakers, but they recommended the bipole/dipole ultra surround speakers to go on his back wall and match the ultra bookshelf and ultra center he intends to use up front. We recommend prime satellites, and Rob K has started with the idea of using prime elevation speakers turned sideways as his surrounds. So what's the final verdict?
Yeah. I'm still in favor of prime satellites. Surprise, surprise.
All right.
So, we don't often disagree with SVS, but I just can't see my way to mounting. So in his case, if he went with the ultra surrounds, which are they have the option, you can run them as dipoles, where they're kind of like the trapezoidal shape, where you've got two sets of drivers, two tweeters, two woofers, and they're firing off at off angles from each other.
Right.
So you can run them as dipoles, where the two sides are out of phase with each other. You can run them as bipoles, where the two sides are in phase with each other, or in fact, you can run them as like dual mono. So one side is playing, say, the surround channel, and the other side is playing, say, the surround back channel. So you can, they have that option. They are a cool speaker, but in his setup, they'd have to go on the back wall because he has no right side wall. So then the suggestion was to mount them on the back wall, which means that one of the drivers, say, so your surround left speaker in his instance, one of the sides is firing straight into his left side wall, like straight into the left side
pretty
wall.
much just, he's got it treated with some sound absorption, but still.
Yeah, and he'd have to move what's there out of the way, and then it would be firing straight into the wall, and then the other one would be firing kind of right into the back of his head, and then on the right side, it would kind of be on the other side of the window, which means one side is firing off into the emptiness of the kitchen, and the other one is firing right into the back of his head. I'm like, I can't see my way to recommending that. I'm not against those speakers full stop. Just in this setup, it doesn't fully make sense to me.
No, it doesn't to me either. I've never trusted the whole out of phase dipole thing.
A little bit, yeah.
It's never quite made sense to me.
You can sit in the null, and therefore you never actually have any sound firing directly at you. But that's only if you're in the null.
But they kind of mix these things, intending for the speakers to be aimed at the listeners.
And they definitely do these days. Yeah, they're intending monopoles. So the prime elevations turn sideways so that they're kind of angled toward you. I get the thinking on that. But again, it's kind of like the angle is not adjustable, right? It's going to be, the back of them is going to be flush up against the wall, and then it is the angle of the prime elevation speakers. You can't adjust that really. So I'm in favor of just getting prime satellites and using some wall mounts that you can sort of pivot and aim. And actually Monoprice has some nice speaker wall mounts. Now, I was always wondering why Monoprice didn't have a larger selection of speaker wall mounts, but now they've got these great ones that they can only hold up to about 10 pounds per speaker, but that's totally fine for the prime satellites, which are like barely £7, and these ones use kind of a ball joint. These go for $17 a pair from Monoprice.
Oh, okay. Now you've brought up an image now that I see the actual ball for the ball joint. Makes me think of my shoulder. My shoulder, I had to go to physical therapy. It's injured. I had to do a thing. So.
And they do have over at Monoprice now one of my favorite designs, which is sort of a side clamping design of a speaker wall mount. Those go for $25 each, so they do cost more. But those you can fully rotate, like 90 degrees to the right, 90 degrees to the left, if you want to aim them, whatever. So yeah, I would get some of those wall mounts. I would get the Prime Satellite speakers. They cost less anyway. And now you have full maneuverability of where you want to aim them. The other two choices, you don't have that option of maneuvering them.
Yeah, I think it's such an unusual shaped space where you've got a corner and a wall so close on one side, and then the entire rest of the galaxy on the other side, just the void of outer space on the other side.
Well, not quite that bad, but
okay,
yes,
no, but
definitely
it's
a
just
much larger space to your right.
But I feel like I'd want each speaker to be able to aim directly at me in this case.
Or just
or
straight across at each other, yeah.
Sure.
Whatever your choice there, having the option to move them is what I'm in favor of. So I agree. That's my final decision. I don't think Tom would be in large disagreement. I know for sure he wouldn't be recommending the Ultra Surrounds to you.
No, I don't think that makes sense either. So there you go. There's a final verdict. Satellites and aim them. All right, moving on to Jason G on Facebook. First things first, Jason shared a short video showing his screwed up Samsung 46-inch TV that appears all garbled when he first turns it on. Then it turns itself off, its power supply clicks, and then it turns itself back on again. So after all that, the image appears fine, but his wife has agreed that it's probably time to get a new TV. Did he do something to this TV?
I don't think so.
And, honey, we have to get a TV.
He shared the video on Facebook. We'll have a link to the video he shared on Facebook over at avrant.com when this posts. So yeah, you can check it out. It's like a possessed TV. It does work ultimately in the end. It's like I don't know, maybe 25-second process for it to like come on, look really weird, turn itself off, click, turn back on, and there you go. That's not normal.
There's some little something on one of those control boards, but yeah, probably I would just put up with that forever because that's the way I am. I'm cheap. But apparently, the only thing he could possibly replace it with is a 75-inch model. He asked about a 75-inch model for around $2,000, and this podcast, suggested the Vizio P-Series. But after some careful measurement, it turns out the 75-inch display won't physically fit. Eyes bigger than room.
It is big. That
Yes.
is a big TV.
It's somewhat of a corner placement, and the viewing position is about 10 feet away. So he would have loved to get as large a screen as possible, but 65 inches will still be a big upgrade over 46, and that is true. I can tell you from experiencing going from a 50 to a 65 for a little while, that's a big deal.
It's amazing how quickly you get used to it, but
To anything, sure.
But when you first change from 46 to 65, you will definitely say that is a larger image. No question.
Exactly. So which TV to get now? He's back to considering the Samsung Q8FN since he's worried about gaming and having quite a bit of sunlight during the day. So yeah, the fact that he says gaming and sunlight during the day, we're already pointing toward LED televisions of one sort or another, and not so much an OLED.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, honestly, the whole I want a TV that can get brighter during the day because I have sunlight. I don't buy it at all. I don't at all. Because I've lived with an OLED. I've moved it from my theater into my living room because I put my Sony TV into my theater because I figured if I'm going to watch 3D, it's probably going to be in my theater. So I moved my OLED into my living room. I got sunlight coming in during the day.
It's okay.
The OLED is super bright, man.
Yeah, man, I'll tell you what. I remember when we had our Foster OLED, which is what we're calling it now till we get another one. We called it our Foster OLED. We just had it in the house for a while. I just remember being in the next room and looking through the door and just seeing my wife lit up like car headlights were on her. It was ridiculous. So it is awful bright.
Yeah, I'm not buying that you need an LED because you're in a lit room versus an OLED. I'm like, the OLEDs get plenty bright. So the only question really is how much gaming and which types of games, because if you're playing a game that doesn't have a static heads-up display all the time, where it's got little bright icons that never move in their position on the screen.
So many do, though.
So many do, exactly. And if you are a serious gamer and you play for hours on end and you have a heads-up display where those little bright icons are never moving on the screen, no, I mean, OLEDs are less susceptible to permanent image retention than plasmas were.
Sure.
But I do have to admit, it is possible to get image retention, even permanent image retention on an OLED. And that is terrifying if that happens to your expensive OLED TV. Nobody wants that.
They will get in your head about that, that's for sure. But yeah, in those special cases like Rob's describing, then it is time to think about LED.
Right.
Not
and
OLED.
I mean, I wish that weren't the case, because to me, OLED's just kind of the runaway winner. And
well,
I mean,
course,
you're in a room where, I mean, the off-axis viewing, there's no contest.
No contest on off-axis. But then again, if it's just you playing games...
If it's just you playing games and you're in front of the TV on axis, then yeah.
Yeah.
So the other part of it is, you know, if the budget is $2,000, it is still difficult to find a 65-inch OLED for $2,000.
Right.
You can actually find them for right around $2,200.
Right,
that is quite doable now. One little tip is that if you're shopping on Amazon, there are a number of marketplace sellers who, to avoid the minimum advertised pricing rules, they mark the TV as used.
Oh.
But when you read the description, they're like, this is never opened. This is a
Unopened.
completely sealed brand new unit, but we're marking it as used so that we can avoid the minimum advertised pricing rules.
Right. That's great. But I think most folks are like me. You just get a little nervous about that sort of thing, and you just wonder if you get some shady place that's playing
honestly,
tricks with
though,
that.
if they're Amazon Marketplace and they've been around for a while and they got 100% positive rating, I'm pretty okay. You're still covered by Amazon's return policy.
And I'm also frightened because shipping a 65-inch OLED.
There's that.
Oh, Lord. It's it seems so delicate when you take it out of that box. The screen is so thin.
It's thinner than your phone, I know.
It looks like the screen would just sag if you lean the TV over. It's amazing what they can do.
So for all these reasons, we do kind of agree, as much as I am in favor of OLED, it might not be the very best choice for you, Jason. So it does come down to a couple of choices. Now, the Q8FN from Samsung, I think that's a fantastic choice for a serious gamer. I mean, it is full array local dimming. It's not the most zones ever, but they have a really good algorithm on it. You can get the 65-incher for right around $2,000. Again, you might have to use that trick of an Amazon Marketplace seller, but you can get it for right around $2,000, a 65-incher. It does have the variable refresh rate. So if you're using an Xbox One X, you can do the variable refresh rate on that, or if you're gaming from a PC, you can do FreeSync, the AMD FreeSync variable refresh rate, and it's pretty much only Samsung TVs that are doing that right now. So if gaming is like a really top priority, it's hard for me to say that you should get anything other than that. For everybody else, where maybe they care more about having Dolby Vision than variable refresh rate, because Samsung doesn't support Dolby Vision, then you could look at Vizio's 65-inch, the P-Series Quantum. Not the P-Series, the P-Series Quantum, because it has the quantum dots, and it's right around $2,000 for the 65-incher of the Vizio P-Series Quantum. It is still a fantastic gaming TV because it has very low latency, but it does not have the variable refresh rate, but it does have Dolby Vision. So you could kind of choose between the Vizio P-Series Quantum and the Samsung Q8FN. Both of those are fantastic choices right around $2,000 for gaming as a top priority.
Both of those are viewable at Best Buy, aren't they?
They should be. Most Best Buy should definitely have those on display, along with an OLED. I'm sure they'll have a C8 OLED on display at a Best Buy.
The only problem with Best Buy, though, those major brand name TVs that are viewable, you can't do anything to them.
No,
all you can do is you can only stand there and watch their demos.
And they'll cost a bit more than an Amazon Marketplace seller.
That's right.
But you can have a look in person.
But you can have a look, and all you'll see is whatever demo they're running.
Honestly, Jason, if you were leaning towards a Samsung Q8FN, and maybe that's because of gaming, which it very well could be, I have no reason to steer you away from that. I think that's a very good choice.
Oh, you'll be happy. Oh, yeah. No doubt. He'd like to get a receiver that can do Atmos. And before we warn him away from Atmos in his current setup, he does intend to have a proper home theater room in the not too distant future. So he's looking ahead a bit at a 7.2.4 setup in there. And my one recommendation is you really need to nail down how far in the future that is, because if you can't be sure, don't purchase for things you aren't going to have very soon.
I have to agree with that. I have done that many times. It has basically never paid dividends. It has pretty much always been better to buy what I actually will use right now.
Right, because you can always sell stuff used. and you can if you wait, features come along at lower prices. So don't buy too far ahead.
But if he is going to implement a 7.2.4 configuration right now, even though he's like, my room isn't optimal for it, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Sure.
Then, hey, here we go.
Here we go. He'd prefer a single box. He doesn't really want to mess around with external amps. So which AV receiver would we recommend for powering a 7.2.4 setup all on its own? So you need something that does...
it's got 11 amplifiers.
11 amplifiers, yeah. Okay, so here we go. Accessories for less sells, drum roll please, the AVR-X6400H.
From Denon.
From Denon,
That's
yes.
right.
And that is on sale for $12.99.
$1,300. That is really about the lowest price you're going to find for a really nice AV receiver with 11 amplifiers built into it. It can completely power a 7.2.4 setup all by itself. Doesn't need any external amps. I mean, I would caution if you were in a very large room with inefficient speakers, you are asking a single power supply to power 11 speakers potentially. But he did mention that he's leaning towards using clip speakers in his future dedicated home theater, at which point you have zero problem in terms of amplifier power.
Yeah, they'll blow your head apart with a very little amount of wattage.
That's
sure.
right. So that to me sounds good. $1,300, you're really not going to beat that for 11 amps built in. Yeah, I can't think of anything better than that choice. The AVR-X6400H from Denon.
There you go. Moving on to Marty S. Marty's theater area is wide open to the rest of his house. I see a theme. But you know what? Before I read the rest of Marty's question, that happens so much. So many of us are limited by the houses that we can't upgrade anytime soon. I mean, space and time affect us, and very few of us has this person. I mean, like I'm never going to have more than, I can do 5.1 plus maybe 2 up toward the ceiling, but it's not going to happen anytime soon that I can do more. So I get it, man. So he's got this wide open to the rest of his house theater area, and it's going to stay that way. So full base pressurization is not an option without a Saturn V rocket or something. That said, he is using a pair of HSU. Now, did you say shoe?
They say to say shoe. I say HSU because it's capitalized, and if you're searching for it, it's like, well, now you know exactly what we're talking about. If I say shoe, you might spell that. You might look for
like a thing you put on your foot. Yeah. So let's say, I like your way of saying it. HSU. VTF3. He's using a pair of HSU VTF3 subwoofers along with his B&W 604 towers, and the subs still have output to spare. Sure.
That's good.
Yeah, good.
Those are big subs. 15-inch subs.
Subsection A of Marty's question.
That's right.
He ran Odyssey Multi-EQ XT32. Then he goosed the subwoofer output a little bit more. I understand that. He says the results are very good. Excellent. But he'd enjoy feeling more tactile bass from the really deep stuff and having more dramatic low frequency effects. He tried increasing the subwoofer output even more, but it started to sound unbalanced with the subwoofers being noticeable even when there weren't any low frequency effects.
So just people are sounding real chesty. Right.
So that means whoever mixed that movie left the very lowest notes in the vocals, huh?
Well, not necessarily, because you're saying I've set my front speakers to small, as you should.
Yeah.
So it is offloading.
Okay, yes. Okay, I see what you mean.
Yeah, and it is going to be playing all the way up to at least 160 hertz. So, you know, the very lowest part of male voices and that, it's going to be playing out of the subs, and you turn those subs up. You know, I mean, Odyssey said, hey, set them at this level, and you manually turn them up louder than that, and some of that bass from the, from all the channels of the speakers, that's being funneled into your subwoofers now, and it's becoming unbalanced. Right?
Suddenly, everyone is Barry White.
Yeah.
It's amazing. He's got his B&W tower set to small, as we always recommend. If he were to set them to large and set his subwoofers to only play the dedicated LFE channel, means the lowest parts of the LFE channel, I guess, right?
Well, no, I mean the actual dedicated LFE channel. That's
okay, so routing nothing from the front speakers.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Could he boost the subwoofer output then to get the dramatic LFE he's looking for without making everything else sound boomy the way boosting the subwoofer output sounds now? Well, depends on what those B&W towers can do, right?
And I mean where they're placed, what the response from them is going to be. Also, I don't know if he is just using a 2.2 setup, but if you have other speakers, you're not going to want to set all of them too large, and if you set any of your other speakers to small, their bass gets routed to your subwoofers, not to your towers. So you're
still getting like dialogue center channel.
Yeah, your center speaker, unless you set it to large as well. Not to mention, so yeah, B&W 604 towers, those cannot play down to 20 hertz on their own, so you're going to be missing some bass that might have been mixed into those front, left, right channels. It's just not going to play at the volume it's supposed to. Plus, on top of that, you're asking towers, which are positioned for good imaging from your mid-range and treble frequencies, to now produce bass, and they're not in the best location to produce bass. You're going to have uneven bass across your seating, asking your towers to play full range. So I can't say I'm in favor of this plan. Okay. Now, I get it. You're like, so this is the thing. He's in a wide open room. His theater area is open to the rest of his house. You can't pressurize it, so you can't get the little tingles that you only feel and don't really even hear. You can't really, I mean, you could if you had subwoofers capable of that output and you cranked it loud enough, but that, for everyone else in the house, this becomes, they're feeling it too. Yeah,
when you have a space that can't be pressurized, the best you can do is just sit really close to your sub.
I mean, it can be pressurized, but now everybody in the house is getting that same pressurization. That usually doesn't go over so well. Even your dishes start to complain, right? So
right. You'll find out which window panes are loose and need to be reglazed.
Yeah, so I can't say I'm in favor of this. And actually, he asks something that I think is a decent alternative.
Here we go.
I'll leave the first part at that.
Here we go. He visited a Dolby Cinema, and he has to admit he liked the ButtKickers. So this may be a way to go. They weren't overdone. So if he set them up at home, could they deliver the tactile sensation in the deepest bass that he's looking for? And they can.
They can.
Yeah. He tried an inexpensive Denon audio.
I want to say a little bit more about that.
Oh, I'll just move it on to me. That was an answer.
Yes. No, they can. You do, like you say, when they're not overdone, because the temptation is to, shake your chair like all get out, and that gets old real quick. But they can actually be set up to be very subtle and give you that. Yeah, I'm just feeling a tingling sensation like you would in a fully pressurized room. They can do a good job of that when set up properly. But he's going to be asking about the next part that I want to warn you about, which is that normally people get a tactile transducer and they just use a Y splitter from their subwoofer output and feed the tactile transducers the very same signal that the subwoofer is receiving.
Right, of course, but that would feed those higher bass signals that you're already unhappy with.
It would feed some higher bass signals, and if you have applied any sort of equalization to your subwoofers, it is feeding that equalized signal, that altered signal that might have some boosts and dips in it from the equalizer. That is being fed to the tactile transducer, and the tactile transducer doesn't need equalization. Yeah. It's not sending sound waves out into a room that need to be equalized. It's just responding to what should be a completely linear signal. So that leads us right into the next part.
Oh, okay. So I moved on way too fast. He tried an inexpensive Denon audio tactile transducer, but even with its amp set to the lowest available crossover setting of 50 hertz, it still vibrated too much and seemed to do so at higher frequencies than he would have liked. Is there a cheap and easy way to lower the crossover even more, just to see if the Denon tactile transducer could get the job done, or should he just pony up for a ButtKicker brand tactile transducer? And this is where a miniDSP comes into play.
Yes, it does. Yeah, so for just under $100, you can get yourself a miniDSP 2x4, and I will absolutely say, get the miniDSP 2x4. What you're going to do is feed your subwoofer output from your AV receiver into the miniDSP. And now you have a couple options here, right? You can, let's see, you can pass the signal right through the miniDSP and send it on its way to the subwoofer without the miniDSP doing anything to the signal that's being sent to the subwoofer. Right. And that way your AV receiver's equalization can still be active and the miniDSP is just acting as a pass-through for that part of it. Mm-hmm. But then on one of its other outputs, you can basically counteract the equalization that's being done by the AV receiver's subwoofer signal.
So you can flatten it back out again.
Flatten it back out and then feed that flattened out signal to the tactile transducer. Right. So I would absolutely, either way, even if you do this and you're like, the Dayton Audio tactile transducer still isn't quite giving me everything I want, so I'm going to upgrade to a ButtKicker brand transducer, you're still going to want the miniDSP. So either way, I'm highly recommending you get the miniDSP so that you can have the flattened out signal being sent to the tactile transducer, and you can apply whatever additional low pass filter you want to the signal that's being sent to only the tactile transducer.
Right, you can roll it off anywhere you want to.
Anywhere using the miniDSP.
By the way, I feel like we might ought to just stop, and for people that don't listen all the time, explain what the miniDSP is again.
It's a little processor.
It's a little box.
Yeah.
You put the input in, and it's programmable from a computer, right?
That's right, yeah. So the miniDSP 2x4, the 2x4 refers to it has 2 inputs and 4 outputs.
Right.
So very flexible, and yes, you do connect it via USB to a laptop or a computer of your choice, and that's where you can do all the programming. You can apply equalization filters, other types of filters can be applied. You can mess with the phase of the signal. Any number of things to change the gain of the signal that's there, and they have plugins to do additional things to the signal if you want to.
So is it just a subwoofer device, or is this for
Oh, no,
all
absolutely
frequencies?
not. No, there's
all
a multitude of things. You can use it as an external crossover if you're building your own speakers.
Okay.
You can use it to crossover between your speakers and subwoofer if your AV receiver doesn't have bass management. There's any number of things you can do. It's a
So
nice
you
little
program it,
processing
and
box.
then you unplug your computer USB, and you tuck it away wherever
That's
you
right.
want, because it's just a little bitty box like so many other doohickeys we have nowadays. All right, so a little bit more here from Marty. Let's see. He used his Galaxy CM130 SPL meter to take some measurements using Room EQ Wizard. The frequency response graphs weren't nearly as flat as what the, quote, corrected curves in the Odyssey Editor app showed. But is that because the real measurements will always look worse than Odyssey's predictions, or is it because his SPL meter isn't a very accurate measurement microphone? Should he invest in a calibrated UMIK 1?
Little from column A, little from column B.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
So the measurements that you look up in Room EQ Wizard will always look jaggier than what the Odyssey Editor app shows you in its predicted correction curves, because the Odyssey Editor app is smoothing the graph.
Obviously, yeah.
Whereas Room EQ Wizard, I mean, you can choose to smooth the output in Room EQ Wizard and look at it that way, at which point it might look very similar to what
Problem
the Odyssey Editor
solved.
app shows you. That's right. But Room EQ Wizard can also show you the entirely unsmoothed, this is exactly what was measured graph.
Right.
So it'll pretty much always look more jagged than what the prediction shows you in the Odyssey Editor app. And that is not the end of the world by any means. We are very poor at picking up very small little variations. So that is not the end of the world at all. The other side of it is an SPL meter, by its nature, is not a full range microphone. The CM130 is usually used in C weighting, which means that it is rolling off in its response quite dramatically below 80 hertz and quite dramatically above 5,000 to 8,000 hertz. So if you were to see the output measurement of the CM130 SPL meter measuring a perfectly flat sweep, right?
Yeah.
So something plays a perfectly linear sweep, and you just measure it with the SPL meter and see exactly what the SPL meter is reading, it would be a little frowny face.
Yeah, it would fall off at the base, fall off at the treble.
It wouldn't be a flat line.
Right.
It'd be down at the low end, and it'd be down at the high end.
But hopefully it would be
curve in
flat
between.
for the frequencies it can do.
Yeah, and that's the C weighting. Between 80 and 5,000 hertz, it's really quite linear in there. So in Room EQ Wizard, in the preferences, in the microphone tab of the preferences, it has the option to say, I'm using a C-weighted SPL meter. So compensate for that.
Okay, all right.
So he might have already done that and still gotten kind of a jaggy graph, and that's all he was worried about. But if you didn't, make sure you go into the preferences of Room EQ Wizard and go in the microphone tab and say, yeah, what I'm using is a C-weighted SPL meter. And at least that'll give you a reasonably linear response. It knows what C weighting looks like, so it just introduces an inverse curve to the output of that. And
So
it's pretty reasonable.
How much better is a UMIC
Is
1?
a UMIC 1?
How much more of that flat, perfect response would you see before it rolled off?
I mean, honestly, I don't think it's necessary because what we're interested in isn't absolute results. We're interested in relative results. We want to measure once and then make a change and then measure a second time and compare those two. So as long as you're using the same microphone between those two, you can compare what changed.
Yeah,
and that's what's more important. Also, and I'm going to stress again, as I stressed last week, do ultimately go by what it sounds like to your human ears.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Never forget.
It is so easy to see a hump or a dip in a graph and go, oh my goodness, I need to correct that. And yet when you play a sweep and listen to it, you don't hear that hump or dip. So who cares?
Right.
That can definitely happen. So I don't think it's, I mean, if you were to invest in a UMIC 1, I don't think you'll be disappointed. But if you're like, I could spend this $100 on a miniDSP instead, I can only get one of these things, then get the miniDSP and don't get the UMIC 1.
Okay. Yeah, that makes good sense. I notice a theme through a lot of questions as I've been on this show several times, and it's people always worrying, do I have the best?
Of course.
You know what I mean? Like, am I missing something?
This is our crowd, and I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I understand that feeling too, but also don't let the feeling drive you insane.
Yes,
I'm
do not
bad
let
about
perfection be the enemy of greatness.
Right. Are you enjoying it? Does it sound good to you?
This is fantastic. Is it as good as it? Am I 1% off from peak optimal? Well, then I hate it.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who feel like that, and you know.
Oh, I get it. I get it.
I know you. Well, we're always chasing that perfection, aren't we? So finally, after an hour, we're going to do a few new questions for this week and see what we can do. Andrew L. is up next. Andrew says he found our podcast last year, but that was after he had finished his home theater, and he wishes he had found us earlier since he isn't completely happy with his results. But now he's preparing to renovate, so he's here to get our advice. Okay, so I wonder how fresh we can start here.
Take two.
The room is in a basement, 13 feet wide, 21 feet long, and 8 feet tall. But there's an opening on the left wall. Again, another opening on a wall.
This one's just a doorway, though.
Okay, it's not bad. It's not bad. So this opening on the left wall, about 4 feet from the back wall, he says a sliding style door would be acceptable for closing off that opening, so he assumes we'd be in favor of that. Probably. By the way, my wife's here.
Hello, Lee's wife.
Come around and wave into the camera. Come around and wave.
People get to see Lee's wife.
Say hello into this microphone.
Hello, everyone.
There she is. She's been off rehearsing parts for, she's playing in an orchestra. She plays percussion instruments. Nice. Yeah, so she's the talented one.
Well, welcome to AVRant. It's lovely to have you. Thank you.
So you can just close that door when you leave the room, okay? All right, so Heather's here, yay.
Yes.
The talented musician of the family. So we're going along saying he's assuming we'd be in favor of something that closed off that opening.
Yeah, I mean, I have to be in favor of closing off. I mean, you want a dedicated theater, and we're going to get into some soundproofing concerns. So, yes, I have to say we're in favor of closing off that opening. Just make sure that you can get sliding style doors that are constructed well enough that they don't rattle.
Exactly.
And that's what you want.
Don't get the cheap ones. You don't want thin, floppy things in there. And
so,
also,
I mean, that's really the only major concern, because if you get one of the ones that rattles, then does that ruin your experience in a hurry? But there are quality sliding style doors that don't rattle. That's what you got to get. But of course, they're going to cost a bit more.
Right. I mentioned like having one rattling pane in a window. We have that in our living room. If you hit just the right window note. Yeah. So there are 3 other doors, one on the back wall close to the left side that goes to a bedroom, and 2 more on the left wall that go to a storage area and the mechanical room. All 3 of those doors are hollow core, so he's planning to replace all 3 with solid core doors. Sound good? Oh, that is better.
Yep, that sounds good.
They're heavier, harder to move with the sound waves. They won't rattle as much. They won't add anything to it.
It is more mass, and you can get the type that basically they're basically exterior doors, right? They come with some weather stripping, so you're preventing any air movement, any flanking paths, more mass. That's all good. The only thing is, again, the concern of closing off a mechanical room in a basement. I assume, since he finished the entire basement, that the air return situation was already considered.
Right.
But again, this is for everyone else as well, right? You can't just close off your furnace from the rest of your basement if it wasn't designed for that. You can absolutely design it for that, but most basements where you just come in and it's an unfinished or it's an open basement, you probably notice some heat registers in your ceiling, or maybe they've installed heat registers in the walls or near the floor. But you might not notice any air returns like you have upstairs, probably in your hallway or something like that. And that's because they're expecting that the air can just circulate within the basement back to the furnace, at which point, usually if you put a door on the furnace room, it has to be a louvered door so the air can get through it, so that the air that's being pushed by your furnace into your basement has an air return path back to the furnace.
Air has to go round and round.
Yeah, but he's already finished the basement. I'm going to assume you already, tackled that side of air return situation, and it's okay to have a solid door closing off your mechanical room.
Right, yeah, as long as you're not replacing a louvered door with a solid door.
Yes, do not replace a louvered door with a solid door. The louvered door is there for a reason if it's there.
Right, so if you're just adding a heavier, massive door that does the same function, you're good.
Right.
All right, let's see, I have lost my place until now. There's only one window, which is on the right side near the front, and that is easily blocked for total light control. All the walls, both interior and exterior, have insulation in them. He had intended to soundproof the ceiling, but he ran out of money. That happens. So he just threw up a single layer of gyprock directly on the ceiling joists. He can hear every click of his dog's toenails when the dog is walking upstairs. Reminds me of the wiener dog I had. So he's planning to take down the gyprock ceiling, put in insulation, then install sound clips and hat channels to hang a drywall ceiling. Will that be worth it? Yeah.
Yup.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
totally be worth it.
To the rest of your family upstairs, it'll really be worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like he hasn't gone to the maximum extent of soundproofing. The maximum extent of soundproofing is you have decoupled studs from each other, insulation in all the bays, then decoupled drywall with 2 layers of drywall and green glue in between those 2 layers of drywall, right? This is sort of the maximum you can do. He's done the... sort of, I don't know if you call it halfway, a little bit more than halfway, right? You've insulated.
That's a B+ at least.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's what you shoot for. Don't kill yourself for the A+ necessarily, but if you can afford it, maybe.
And yeah, the thin layer of gyprock directly on the ceiling joists. I mean, that's the situation where some people have asked about, I've suggested using a drop tile ceiling, right? A T-bar ceiling. And they're like, how is that anything? I'm like, the drop T-bar ceiling with proper thick acoustic tiles, right? Not just the absorption acoustic tiles, but the actual ones that are intended to give you some sound blockage, some sound isolation. While that is nowhere near as good as a continuous hung drywall ceiling, like what he's proposing to do, so good on you. But that drop tile ceiling can be better than just the thin layer of one layer of gyprock directly on the ceiling joist. That's where I sometimes say, hey, if you're going to install a drop tile ceiling anyway, it's not that bad. It's better than just the single layer of gyprock.
There are levels of
levels. That's right.
Good to better to best. Sure.
That's right.
And you can tell Andrew's been listening to the show, though. So far, everything we're like, yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, that's a good idea. So he's handy and can do the renovations himself. Excellento. He originally installed conduit and ran all the wires in the walls, but he put his equipment rack in the front left corner and terminated all of the connections up front using wall plates. Very nice. See, I'm lazy. I would just pull them all through one big hole. And now he regrets that location. He initially thought he needed everything up front for IR remote control, but now he realizes that with something like a Harmony Hub, he doesn't actually need line of sight. So he'd prefer to have his equipment rack in the rear right corner. He won't take down all the walls to remove the conduit he already ran, but he's going to be taking down the gyprock ceiling, so he figures he can run new conduit and wiring in the ceiling this time. Worth it? Probably, if that's the look and arrangement you want.
Right.
That's a question for you, Andrew.
I mean, that is one you really have to tell us. How badly do you want to get the equipment out of the front left corner and into the rear right corner?
Yeah.
Because, like you say, if you're taking down the ceiling anyway, absolutely now is the time to do it. No question about that. You are going to have a drop in the rear right corner that goes from the ceiling down to the wall plates you're probably going to install in the rear right corner. But he's handy. He can handle, one bay being opened up and patching that. I'm sure of that.
I feel like the kinds of questions he's asking, the things he's done so far, he's the kind of person that probably it's going to gnaw at his very soul if he doesn't move the stuff.
Yeah.
So my guess is he should do it, right?
I mean, again, if you're not paying other people, because the biggest expense is usually the labor portion of the fee, not the material, because this is just, I mean, you can reuse you ran the wires in conduit, so that means you can pull them out and reuse them.
Exactly.
As long as they're long enough.
Yeah, if you already used conduit and you can pull things back out and you're already using the word regret.
Yep.
Yeah, then it's worth it probably.
I believe so. I think this is the way. Otherwise, you're going to end up finishing that ceiling again, and they're going, I really should have moved this when I had the chance. So.
Yeah. I have feelings about things in the past like that too. So far, this is the Agree with Andrew segment of our show. With the equipment rack moved, he'll have the whole 13-foot front wall open for his display and front speakers. An even better argument for that. At the moment, he's sitting 8 feet away from a 55-inch screen. He likes the notion of a 100-inch or larger projection setup. Yeah. But he'd have to wait a bit and save up if he's going to get a really good 4K projector. Well, do you have to? On the other hand, he could get a 75-inch flat panel sooner, and he's okay with keeping his 8-foot seating distance to have a larger field of view. So he's 13 feet wide. I guess that's not too wide. Yeah, a 75-inch flat panel could look great. Again, is your dream the 100-inch or larger projector? I mean, he's got a 21-foot long room. Yeah, you can get
so he's basically within the front third of it.
Yeah.
He's got a lot of space behind him. I don't know. I mean, maybe he's making use of the space behind him.
Sure. Maybe there's a bar back there and a popcorn machine and whatnot.
Yeah. Lots of people do something. They put a poker table back there or something, right? So I'm not sure what all is happening behind where your current seats are. Because, of course, with a 21-foot long room, you have plenty of space if you do want a projection setup. You could have at least 2 rows of seats easily. And then a nice 110, 120-inch screen would be perfectly reasonable in this size of a room.
It kind of comes down to what you mean by wait a bit. What's a bit for you? And save up. How much saving do you have to do? And would you be unhappy with a really good 1080p projector or one that
the other thing is you got a wobble K, right?
I was about to say,
the Epson 5050 coming out shortly. At least I expect it. I'm still surprised they haven't officially announced that thing. They announced the European version. I don't know where the North American version is, but that's going to be like around $2,700, which is, I would expect, quite close to what he would expect to pay for a 75-inch flat panel.
That's not far, yeah.
I mean, if he was looking at a 77-inch OLED, that's up at $7,000. So I don't think that was probably what he was considering. As nice as that would be, a 77-inch OLED.
It would be amazing.
But I mean, you could definitely be considering something like a wobble K projector. You could even look at, like I mentioned last week, one of the 1 or 2 year old JVC wobble K models, which you can now get around $3,000 to $4,000, which again is pretty close to a lot of 75-inch.
$3,000 is not way out of the range.
No, so I think there are options here. So really, to me, the answer to this question, Andrew, is what's happening behind your current seats? Are you using that space, or would you, if the screen were large enough, like to move your seats back? Because if you would, and this is actually really important for what he's asking in a coming up question,
right?
You really need to determine where you want to put your seats. That's of critical importance in this. Yeah. So, I mean, I can't answer that for you because it's entirely reasonable to sit like 8 feet away from a 75-inch screen. That's about a 40-degree field of view. That's entirely reasonable.
If wait a bit means some number of months and not years,
right?
I'm definitely going for that projector moving the seat back. Yeah.
And like I say, you can get a darn good wobble K projector for right around the same price. So he's saying he would like 100-inch or larger. So I'm like 120-inch silver ticket screen, a 50/50 Epson projector. It's not much more expensive than a 75-inch flat panel. And then you could sit.
there just is a perception and gut difference. The experience is different with a projector.
It is.
It just is.
And we know he's got the full light control.
Yeah.
So there's no reason you couldn't use a projector in here.
Man, move that equipment to the back right corner and get you a projector. I think that's what.
As long as the room behind you is open.
Yeah. As long as nothing crazy is going on back there.
Yeah.
So the setup is mostly for movies and TV shows with occasional football Sundays. So what's our opinion? We just gave it. I think you want a projector. Yeah. And I think you got a room that's reasonable for it.
You got a room that can handle it. Absolutely.
And you're handy and you can do most of this stuff. So it's really just about buying equipment.
You don't have to get the $8,000 4K projector. It isn't necessary for a really nice experience.
Right. I mean, for one thing, the TV shows and the football Sundays aren't in 4K.
There is that.
Right. Moving on to a couple more bits from him. With the larger screen and his front left-right speakers spread farther apart, see, he already knows he's doing this. Should he get a second center speaker? Would that make the sound more even across the front? He's using a Paradigm CC190 center right now, and dialogue is clear and sounds great, but he can get a deal on a second one, and would that be beneficial? I would think no.
Nope. This is a hard no.
A hard no.
Hard no.
No, the last thing you want to do is make that more diffuse coming from more locations.
You also don't want two tweeters playing the same thing but far apart from each other. That is a recipe for horrible comb filtering. So nope, stick with what you got. It already sounds good, and it's all you need.
There you go. See, he's already so close to everything being perfect. Since he will be redoing the ceiling, he was thinking he'd pre-wire for Atmos speakers and surround backs. Good idea. Worth the relatively small investment of time and money? Yes, because you can. The reason I wouldn't do it is because I really can't, not without a ton of trouble. Or should he just skip it? No, this sounds good. Or maybe still pre-wire, but for front and rear height speakers on the front and back walls instead of top speakers in the actual ceiling. See, I think we know Atmos is the thing now. You have a chance to make it perfect for Atmos.
Oh, make it perfect. Pre-wiring when the ceiling's already down?
Man,
heck yeah. Heck yeah.
Do it.
But it's really important that you determine where you're going to sit first.
Right.
That determines everything else. I mean, he's talking about maybe installing surround back speakers, so that makes me think this is just a theater. He doesn't have something of tremendous importance behind him that's like a whole different section of the room or something.
Right.
That he could have surround back speakers. So all of this is making me lead towards you get the nice 120-inch screen. You sit, I don't know, about 11 feet away.
Yeah.
That puts you just past the midway point of your room, which is also nice. And then you're like, okay, I'm going to put about 4 feet in front of me. I'm going to have some top front speakers. Or maybe he was thinking like maybe he'd even wire for top middles. So, okay, directly above you put top middles. 5 feet in front of you, you put your top fronts. 5 feet behind you, you put your top rears.
Yeah.
You have the wires already for the surround backs. I'm like, that's all working out pretty darn spiffy.
Dude, it sounds just wonderful. Yeah, and the investment right now is not so much out of whack.
And a ceiling that's coming down anyway.
That for that particular function, yes, but I'm still thinking like, hey, it's time for that projector, and it's time to move those seat backs. It's time to wire for all these speakers can be done perfectly.
I mean, heck, like you said, I mean, I jumped straight to a wobble K projector at about $2,700, but I'm like, for $700, you could get a BenQ 1080p projector that still looks remarkably good.
Yeah, and so think of it this way. Again, I think I said this before to someone else. Don't discount the idea of buying something less expensive now, then selling it and buying the next big thing when it gets cheaper. Because 1080p projection, and I was at Tom's house this summer, and his 1080p projector looks amazing.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. There's nothing wrong with a 1080p. So,
going from a 55-inch flat panel to that, it's gonna blow your mind for a good while.
So I say it's projector time and Atmos time. You've got the situation. Couldn't be more perfect. So there you go.
Can't disagree.
That is until he closes off all his doors improperly and suffocates in there, and that's not good. So let us move on to Nick B and see if we can answer you like 3 questions this week. These are long questions you have laid out.
That's how it goes, man.
I know, man. I am scrolling and people are just like, they're so excited to ask these questions. It's wonderful. Here's Nick B for the next 20 minutes. Nick just wants to double check his understanding about using a single sub in a room when you only care about one seat. Okay. He understands that a standing wave is going to occur whenever one of the dimensions of the room is evenly divisible by a particular sound wave's wavelength. He also understands that with careful placement, you can avoid having your one seat in a full-on cancellation null. Sure. So as long as you do that, you can then use EQ to flatten any big peaks and fill in small dips, and less about filling in small dips, resulting in pretty darn flat frequency response. Yes, at least for just that one seat. Sure. So that all seems well and good for the frequency response at that one seat, but what about the time domain? Won't the room still be resonating as its standing wave at its standing wave frequencies? And since those are low frequencies, isn't it basically impossible to reduce that ringing using just a reasonable amount of absorption panels? Won't the room still be resonating at its standing wave frequencies?
This is such a non-intuitive answer, but yeah. Well, we'll finish up the question and dig into it.
Would anything other than multiple subwoofers be able to reduce or fix this ringing at specific low bass frequencies? Could any room correction program help? Or is one sub for one seat not actually true? Because this ringing is going to be an unfixable problem without multiple subs. Whew, okay. Rob, ringing. Explain.
All right. So there is a phrase that I will completely cop to the fact that I do not fully comprehend what it actually means.
Okay, good. You don't comprehend something. We all feel better because of that.
But it's called a minimum phase device. And in a minimum phase device, I don't comprehend what that actually means fully, but in the case of a subwoofer, in the case of very low bass frequencies in a small room, where it is acting as a minimum phase device, the important characteristic is that the time and the frequency are inseparable from each other. And the reason for that is because you are never hearing just the direct sound. In these very low bass frequencies, you are only ever hearing a cumulative response of some amount of reflected sound waves reaching your ears. You're never hearing just the original sound going from the source straight to your ears. It has always had time, just due to the wavelength and the dimensions of your room, to have bounced off of something and interacted with itself.
You realize you're pushing into the very space-time nature of reality with this answer. I'm impressed.
So, in a minimum phase device situation, if you fix the frequency response, you have automatically fixed the time domain response. And if you fix the time domain response, you have automatically fixed the frequency response.
Yeah, because space and time are the same, because Einstein.
They are inseparable from each other in this situation. Now, in a situation in the higher frequencies where you can separate the direct sound from the reflected sound, this is not the case. There, you can lower the echoing without altering the frequency response, or you can alter the frequency response without reducing the echoing, because there is time for that frequency response to have gone directly from the source to your ear without anything else manipulating it, versus now it has gone past your ear, bounced off to something, come back, and that's the echo you're hearing. So you can get rid of the echo without having changed the frequency response of a short wavelength. But a super long wavelength, you can't. So the interesting answer is you can do one sub, one seat.
Yeah,
as long as you're not in a full-on cancellation null, you can equalize it, which means you have fixed the frequency response, which means for that one seat, you have now automatically fixed the time domain response as well. But it's only true of that one location.
Right. So this really is about one seat.
Everywhere else in the room, and sometimes a very small distance away from that one spot, perhaps even only the distance between your two ears, which could be a problem. It's not usually that short, but if you like to move back and forth, that could be enough. Sometimes it's only a foot away. It's not going to be the case. Now you're going to have a completely different frequency response at any other location, which means necessarily you also have a different time domain response everywhere other than that one location where the frequency response and time domain are good. So it's very, very limiting to do the one seat, one sub, but it still works because it is a minimum phase device.
All right, that makes a little bit of sense. His concern doesn't really apply to those low frequencies. Is basically
the very low frequencies.
The very low frequencies, yes. Yeah. Because they're as big as the room, or bigger. So IMAX Enhanced appears to be using HDR10+, and obviously there's already a fair amount of Dolby Vision content, but there aren't any displays that handle both dynamic metadata formats.
Nope, they do one or the other.
Right. And so far, there aren't any projectors for the home market that do either Dolby Vision or HDR10
Plus.
HDR10 Plus. We've talked about some of the challenges that seem to be preventing Dolby Vision on projectors. How you'd probably have to have a professional come in to measure the actual light levels and enter those values into some sort of tightly controlled program. But what about HDR10 Plus? Do we think HDR10 Plus could be implemented on projectors? And if it were, would that light a fire under Dolby's butt to get Dolby Vision on projectors? Or is that even possible?
So, I mean, HDR10 Plus, it's the same data as HDR10 or Dolby Vision, and just like Dolby Vision, is just that it's that data on a frame-by-frame or scene-by-scene basis.
Right.
So it's still asking the projector to produce a number of nits that the projector cannot produce. So the projector has to tone map it. And then it comes down to how has the projector been programmed to do the tone mapping. If it could do Dolby Vision or HDR10 Plus, those two things would be equivalent to each other. It would have to be changing its tone mapping on the fly in response to the new metadata that's coming on a scene-by-scene or a frame-by-frame basis.
Okay.
So there's no reason why HDR10 Plus would be easier to implement on a projector versus Dolby Vision. They both have the exact same concerns and the exact same problems and the same ways that you'd have to get about it. But more than that, why are we worried about Dolby Vision or HDR10 Plus on a projector?
Right.
Because I've come back to this idea where I much prefer what you can already do if you're watching Ultra HD Blu-rays using one of Panasonic's Ultra HD Blu-ray players, which is the Panasonic Ultra HD Blu-ray player can say, you can select what's the maximum light level I want you to send out, and it will do the tone mapping.
Oh, okay.
So now it just sends out a signal to your projector that the projector doesn't have to tone map. It's already been done by the Panasonic player. And the Panasonic player... So it would be
easier in that. It would make more sense to put the function in the player than the projector.
Well, for Ultra HD Blu-rays it works, but for streaming, of course, it wouldn't work because... other than the streaming that's built into the Panasonic, but that's not every service. Right. So, I mean, the way that I really want them to handle this is the way that LG's OLEDs and now Sony's Master Series OLED is handling HDR10, which is, it's just ignoring the metadata. It is just on the fly analyzing the signal and going, here's what I'm going to do with it.
I see.
So that's what I want projectors to do. Now, you need some pretty beefy processing to do that. But honestly, that's what I don't really think they need to do Dolby Vision or HDR10 Plus because they're never going to produce 1,000 nits. Your projector is never going to do that.
No.
So it's always going to have to do a crazy amount of tone mapping. So I'm like, either tone map it in the source, like the Panasonic player, or just have it analyze the signal on the fly instead of trying to, like, how do you dynamically tone map a signal where you can't even get close to what it's asking you to do?
Yeah, I suppose you could, but yeah, maybe they need to have something that's Dolby Vision for projectors. You know.
Well, I guess they do. They have Dolby Cinemas. It exists.
Right. So it could be done. That is confusing. I get the idea of tone mapping. I know what you mean by that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the whole idea of, you got displays like OLEDs that can hit 700, 800 nits. So there's lots of scenes in a movie that they don't get as bright as 700 or 800 nits. So you're saying, okay, for all those scenes, I don't have to do any tone mapping. I show you exactly the signal that's being sent. It's only for the handful of scenes where there's some object on screen that's 1,000 or 4,000 or 10,000 nits, and now I have to tone map that. Now, if it's static metadata in HDR10, it had to say, well, there's one instance of the brightest thing, and I have to tone map the whole movie based on that.
Yeah, that doesn't seem optimal.
Or you can have dynamic metadata from HDR10 Plus or Dolby Vision, and now I can tone map on a scene-by-scene basis, so I can say, okay, for the majority of the scenes, I don't have to do anything. I can show exactly what you're asking for. For this handful of scenes, you've told me these particular scenes have objects that are super-duper bright that I can't produce, so I'll tone map only those scenes. That makes sense, but a projector is never going to produce the light that's being asked in the signal for any scene. It's always dimmer.
So you said there was a Sony OLED television, not a projector, that is able to do this sort of thing on the fly all by itself. You send
the new Master Series is doing that, and LG's OLEDs already do that. They call it active HDR.
Okay.
So it's ignoring the metadata altogether and just doing it itself.
Right. So the answer sounds to me like really shouldn't the projector do it?
That's what I want the projector to do, because the projector when the signal is saying give me 100 nits, the projector is supposed to give you 50 nits.
Right.
That's the proper light level for a projector. So it's never showing what the signal is actually asking for.
So the answer is make projectors smarter.
That's what I want them to do.
Well, there you go. That would make a lot more sense, wouldn't it? It just would make a lot more sense.
Well, just whatever they're doing in LG OLEDs and Sony's new Master Series OLED, just do that.
Right. Yeah, just ask them for those chips.
That's
sure.
right.
Just do that. Okay, some more from Nick. The most recent 4K projectors from Sony and JVC include new ways of handling HDR. Sony has their HDR reference picture mode that they say is optimized for 1000 nit content, and JVC has their auto tone mapping that automatically selects different tone mapping curves based on the HDR10 metadata. Those seem like steps in the right direction. But couldn't projectors do an even better job if they had dynamic metadata to work with?
I mean, again, that's really iffy. I mean, I suppose you could have a very dim scene where it doesn't need to tone map very much, and then you could have a very bright scene where it needs to tone map a lot, and the end result is that the two scenes kind of look similar because the overall light level hasn't really changed very much. I mean, again, I would rather just have them analyze the incoming signal on the fly, whether it has metadata or not.
Just send the full HDR and let the device...
Just send the PQ10. Just send the HDR10 part of the signal without any metadata.
This is interesting.
So the metadata
kind of sounds like we're approaching a situation where all this stuff they're trying to do with Dolby Vision and HDR10 and 10 Plus wouldn't even be necessary if the devices were smarter.
Yeah, honestly, the way LG and now the Sony Master Series OLED does it with the active HDR, I'm like, yeah, you don't really need dynamic metadata. It's now smart enough to just look at the original signal, ignore all the metadata. Because, I mean, the other little wrinkle in this is that there's a lot of Ultra HD Blu-rays where the metadata is either been zeroed out or it's wrong.
Right. So they've been... So this whole Dolby Vision situation was to compensate for dumb displays.
Yes, it was. That was the entire idea.
Now, it seems like they should have known as fast as things get better and quicker and smarter that we'd all just have smart enough displays.
Dolby did also invent PQ, so it's all them.
I don't know, man. That just seems like it seems like this is one day we'll wonder why we worried about that. Yeah. So, the most recent 4K projectors, did I read that already? I sure did. I'm sorry. I told you I was a little sleepy today. During our recent $25,000 Gear Lust segment, I do remember that, Rob mentioned he'd get a JVC X790 projector and a 137-inch Seymour AV screen. And yes, Rob, you were very, just so fast with your specific recommendations for $25,000. But Nick crunched the numbers using Sound and Vision's published measurements of lumen output levels of the X790. And if Rob was talking about an acoustically transparent screen with gain just below 1.0, then that projector on that screen would max out at about 19 to 20 foot Lamberts and only about 15 foot Lamberts if the DCI color filter is in place. So what was Rob thinking? Was he just unaware? Was he willing to only have SDR light levels even for HDR content? Come on, Rob. Was he talking about getting a higher gain screen and not putting the color filter into operation so that he could hit the recommended 30-foot Lamberts for HDR? If someone were getting this projector, wouldn't they need a smaller screen size if they wanted to retain HDR highlights? What do you have to say for yourself, Rob?
Well, I wasn't thinking as detailed as all these questions.
Right.
I just have it in mind that I have a vague understanding of the JVC projectors, approximately how much light they put out, and approximately what screen sizes they can handle.
Yeah.
And right around 135 inches is sort of where they top out, but that is for SDR brightness. with the full wide color, the full DCI P3 color, the really wide color that requires putting a filter in place, which of course reduces the overall light output a little bit. But they got enough oomph in their lamp
Technical term.
to fill up about 135-inch 16:9 screen with a nice 15, 16-foot Lamberts, which are the numbers that he came up with as well.
Yeah.
With the full wide color. And so, yeah, I'm not that worried about super bright things. Right? No, I mean, I've been comparing my Sony LCD and my LG OLED. Sony LCD is capable of getting way, way brighter. It's capable of doing so. I don't really care.
Yeah.
What I care about is being able to see detail in the image and contrast. I care so much more about contrast than I do about sheer blinding light.
Right. The range of black to white. And do I see all the detail in the very dark and in the very bright? That's way more important than simply the overall measured brightness without regard to anything else.
Because to me, what makes something look HDR isn't just that, oh, look at how crazy bright that little light is.
No, it's the range.
Yeah, I can see detail in the shadows and the highlights at the same time. Which SDR content just doesn't contain.
That's right.
But HDR content does. So, you're absolutely right. I'd end up with SDR light levels, but I'd have the full wide color. It'd be a nice bright 16-foot Lamberts. That's, you know, a lot of projectors aren't actually normally that bright. And I got an Oppo Blu-ray player. It can convert the HDR down to SDR while retaining the full wide color really, really well. So I get all the detail. I get the super awesome contrast of the JVC projector. I get the full wide color. No, it doesn't hit 100 nits. It hits about 50 nits instead, but I'm perfectly fine with that.
But it still looks gorgeous, and that's kind of the point.
Yeah, because it's got the really nice deep black levels, and it's got the, you know, this one has, the X790 natively has about 100,000 to 1 contrast. Which is so much higher than any LCD flat panel. LCD flat panels are like 6,000 to 1 contrast natively, right? Without local dimming. And the local dimming, I mean, think about it, they got what, 200 to 400 in some of the best ones, right? My Sony Z9D has like 600 something local dimming zones versus 8 million local dimming zones. It's not really a contest.
No, it's not a contest. And by the way, I feel like I should say that I wasn't doing an imitation of Nick a minute ago. That was just dramatic enhancement to have fun. I feel like maybe Nick would think I was trying to. No, I wasn't making fun of Nick.
Well, I know Nick is interested in this projector and he's worried about having all the specs exactly right. And that, I mean, look, if you want to hit the 110, the full 100 nits for HDR that are recommended for projectors, all you got to do is go down to 110-inch screen.
There you go.
And you're done.
Solved.
Yeah.
All right, but those are all very good questions, despite me acting silly, to help us all understand better what it means to have HDR in a projector. Sometimes you have to remind everybody what HDR is. It's not a contest to see how bright one pixel can get.
Well, that's what everybody's taking away from it, right? HDR means brighter. I'm like, really? In fact, most of the time it means darker.
Yeah, it means greater range.
Greater range.
All right, so moving on to Mike S on Facebook. Mike's equipment rack is in a separate room outside his theater. That meant some pretty long speaker wire runs, and all wires, including regular power lines, had to go through one bulkhead at one point. That bulkhead's about 10 feet long. He tried to give the speaker wires and RCA cables as much distance from the power lines as he could, but that was only inches inside of that bulkhead. And at other points, the wires needed to cross paths but not run parallel. How worried should he be? Well, if you're not hearing a hum, then you're fine.
But it would be a darn good idea to test, because this is all construction, so he hasn't necessarily hooked anything up to those speaker wires yet.
So what would be an easy way to test that sort of possible analog interference and that, that power hum?
First of all, you'd want the power lines to be live, because otherwise you're not really testing the test conditions. So have the power lines be live. I don't know. If you haven't bought an AV receiver or anything yet, you are going to need some kind of amplified signal to feed into those speaker wires and a speaker on the other end.
Yep.
But borrow equipment from somebody.
Right. A couple of decent speakers and any decent receiver, you can at least tell if you have a big problem.
But I mean, my honest answer is because when he this question was in segments on Facebook, we had a little bit of back and forth, and when he first mentioned it, I thought that the speaker wires were running in parallel with the Romex power lines for a greater distance. And basically, the greater the distance that two wires are running parallel to one another, the more inductance you're going to have. And whichever one of those wires is carrying the higher power signal, that's the one that's going to induce a current to flow in the lower power signal. Now, speaker wire is not shielded because it carries a relatively powerful signal. I mean, orders of magnitude more powerful than the line level signal that's going through your coaxial RCA cables, which is why your coaxial RCA cables do need to be shielded. Those are a very weak signal where it would be easy to introduce interference, whereas speaker wires are carrying a pretty powerful signal, but not as powerful as your power lines. So the greater the distance that they're running parallel to one another, the more likely it is you'll pick up some interference in.
So is 10 feet a great distance that would tend to generate?
It really isn't.
Yeah, okay, good.
And
good.
It's an inverse square law as to how much weaker the signal gets the farther those two parallel wires are from each other. So you're like, he says he tried to get as much distance as he could. It's only inches, but I'm like, that makes a tremendous distance versus them being like right on top of each other.
Right.
So if they're only running parallel to each other for a 10-foot distance, I think you have exceedingly little to be worried about. I mean, you could easily do that inside your own theater, right? You could have a power cord from your surge protector that's, maybe it's 10 feet long. Some of them have a cord that's long. And you've run that along your baseboard somewhere and then run a speaker wire right next to it. And you probably don't pick up anything at all.
I mean, I've run a lot of power cables and speaker cables next to each other over the years, and I've never had that be the problem. I've had like a ground loop hum, but I've never had
that's a different thing entirely.
Yeah, that's entirely different. So, but I've never experienced where just a long power cable generated some problem in a lower level signal cable next to it.
It can happen. I mean, it happens in stadiums, which is why they use XLR cables that are like balanced and shielded, because that way, even if it does pick up interference, it's canceled out when the signal is, one of those signals is inverted on the other end and summed together, and you cancel out whatever interference was picked up. So yeah, if you've got them side by side parallel on top of each other for like 300 feet, I would entirely expect you to pick up interference.
Right, but 10 feet and you've got inches between them.
Inches between them. Almost, I mean, I can't guarantee you with 100% certainty, but you have exceedingly little to worry about.
Okay, well, there you go. That's a nice answer to hear. How worried should he be? Not very. Not at all, almost. So chances are everything's going to be fine. Mark R. Mark and his wife moved into a new house a little over a year ago. The house already had a theater room in the basement. It was marked as specifically being a theater in the plans, but the previous owners had never actually made it into a theater. They'd just thrown down some linoleum flooring and the room was a blank slate. The room is 21.5 feet long, 9 feet high, and mostly 18 feet wide. Mostly. There's a 6-foot portion of the room's length that is a bit narrower due to a jut-in for the doorway. So it comes in as much as the door is wide. So where the doorway is, that's 14.5 feet wide as opposed to 18 feet wide. Sounds about right. The rest of the room is 18 feet wide. Works out to about 3,500 cubic feet in volume. He put down thick carpet with the thickest pad he could manage. He also built a riser that is raised on RLX U-boats and vented with insulation inside to act as some base trapping. The room is much less echoey than when it was completely bare, I can imagine. But he measured with Room EQ Wizard, and he still has plus minus 10 decibel peaks and valleys and 600 millisecond decay times in his bass. So he's looking to improve that. And on the video, we're showing a graph of those. That's
a Room EQ Wizard graph showing the decay times and the frequency response. Given the subwoofer that he uses, which we'll mention in a little bit, I'm shocked at this frequency response.
Yeah.
I have no idea how that tiny sub is managing to play frequencies that low, that loud. It's baffling me, to be honest, to the point that I I wouldn't believe this if I didn't.
So you got like the greatest example of that subwoofer ever. Just his particular sub is amazing.
Or just the particular placement where you excited a room mode.
Yeah.
It's something like that. But in any case, yeah, not the frequency response you would probably aim for.
No.
Let's say so. But yeah, well, we'll talk about ways
it
to.
It can look dramatic on a
that.
graph and not be as dramatic. But okay, let's see. Here's more from him. His wife had one firm rule, which was no visible wires. Fair enough. He accomplished that by having all of the speakers be in-ceiling speakers.
Oh. Even the fronts. Yeah. But hey, no, that's okay.
But that why'd Jeff do that? To hide wires. And all of the gear is in a storage room outside of the theater. Well, that part's of course nice. So he's using 5 Polk in-ceiling speakers, an Outlaw 975 Pre-Pro, and B&K 5-channel amp to power them. 1 Sunfire Junior subwoofer, and an Epson 8350 projector with a 135-inch screen. He put a small bar on the right side, so the jut-in for the doorway is now the front right corner. That means his projection screen is on the 14.5-foot wall, and the whole theater setup is pushed over to the left a little bit. His front row of 5 seats starts up against the left wall, and he has 4 more seats in his back row on his riser. So he's got some pretty cool looking theater seats right there with cup holders and everything. That's pretty snazzy. That looks comfy. He talked with GiK, and they recommended a fair amount of absorption panels that would total about $2,000. 3 242 panels on each side wall, 4 244 panels on the front wall, 2 monster bass traps on the back wall, and 4 corner tri-traps. The total budget he has available is about $5,000. The ceiling speakers are here to stay, and the positioning of the seating and screen isn't going to change. So how should he spend that budget? So he's saying he has $5,000 to make better what he already has.
Yes.
But we can't change the speakers, and we can't move the seats. So we are down to room treatments, right?
Room treatments, subwoofers.
Subwoofers, yeah.
Yeah. No.
All right.
So I mean,
should he spend the $2,000 to get everything GiK recommended? First of all,
I mean, first of all, GiK's plan, I am fully on board with.
Yeah. I mean, sounds great.
Because I mean, if you look at the images of this room, I mean, he's got some flat, hard, bare walls.
Yeah, he does.
In here, he's got the carpet, which is great. That's fantastic with the thick carpet pad. Yeah. He's built this riser that, is absorbing, because it's vented and insulated. So this isn't a completely, like he said, it reduced the echoes quite a bit, just maybe not quite as much as he would like to. So I would focus on the back wall and the side walls. If you did want to reduce the number of panels that you're buying, I don't really think you need the front wall treatments super duper importantly.
Right.
Because you don't have any speakers on the front wall, as most people's theaters do. Right. You've got speakers up in the ceiling, so I'm not super worried about the front wall. You could save a little bit of money there. The tri-traps, now, I mean, Tom's a huge fan of having the bass trapping tri-traps. They certainly wouldn't be a waste, let's say, but as we were talking about, if you fix the frequency response of your deep bass, you automatically fix the time domain.
That's right.
So I'm more worried about fixing that frequency response in your bass, which you've got multiple seats. We're not talking about one sub, one seat. We're talking about more than one sub.
Yeah, right. So what did he say he has right now? He's got one
little Sunfire Junior, which again, I have no comprehension of how that teeny tiny little subwoofer is resulting in a frequency response that he measured. But
don't they have like crazy 1,000-watt amplifiers?
They do. Still makes no sense.
Still looks amazing. Still looks amazing. So basically we've got more questions, but like my first reaction, because this is just me, is like, man, I can build room treatments.
Well, that's just it. I'm like,
and then save that money and buy more subs.
If you could do some DIY.
Yeah.
So first of all, I mean, if you bought everything from GiK that they recommended, I'm not going to say that that's a bad purchase.
No, it's not going to be bad. It's going to look good too.
That's all good advice.
Yeah.
But you could save some money there. You could, first of all, still buy the fully made panels from GiK, but not quite as many. You could sacrifice what they said to put on the front wall. In my opinion, you could actually sacrifice the tri-traps. You do already have a bass trap in the form of your riser. You're going to have more absorption, and I'm going to get you to get multiple subs. So in case you're wondering where the rest of your budget is going to go, it's going to be to getting a couple of new subs.
Because you have so many seats.
Yeah, you really do need at least 2 subs in here.
Yeah.
So yeah, and if you went DIY for the absorption panels, you could save even more money. So that's my take on that first part.
Right. His Outlaw Pre-Pro has annoying HDMI handshaking issues, and it doesn't have any auto room correction. Would it be sacrilege to just use an AV receiver after having used separates? No!
Not one iota. Plus, you're only driving 5 speakers, and they're all in the ceiling.
Right.
So...
No, I think that, yeah. But
the question is, because he has this massively compromised front speaker placement of 3-pole in-ceiling speakers as his front speakers, how much difference is an AV receiver with room correction really gonna make? Now, the annoying HDMI handshaking issues, that's an entirely different thing. But he's obviously thinking he could spend some of this money on a new AV receiver, hopefully upgrade the sound quality at the same time by
it couldn't hurt to have auto room correction. And remember, his question is just, would it be sacrilege? So he's just concerned that remember, he's only asking, does he seem silly to go from pre-pro to no, man, it's okay.
I mean,
Receivers
in almost
sound
every
great.
situation, a flat no. In your situation, tremendously no.
Tremendously.
Not
I think it would
downgrade, it'd be an upgrade.
I think you would like it better. Yeah, it's more appropriate for your
And with
situation.
your setup, I mean, yeah, you could get a X3400H for $500 from Accessories for Less.
There
So
you go.
that could be within the budget for sure.
Yeah. So a new receiver and subwoofers, and if you can make your own room treatments, we're still under that $5.
You can still do this for $5,000 for sure.
Easy.
Yeah.
He imagines his single tiny subwoofer is going to be a target. We already shot it to pieces.
Shocking.
What subs would be appropriate for this room, keeping in mind the no visible wires and no eyesores rule? So I'm guessing he doesn't want the super tall cylindrical.
The cylinders, I don't know. I mean, some people like those.
I like the way they
you
look.
can lie them down horizontally. Never forget, you can lie the cylinder subs horizontally. So you could have one in the middle of your front wall, lying down sideways beneath your screen.
Also, I'd like to point out that currently you can see wires going to his little sub.
You can see a power cord.
You see a
You're
power cord.
never going to avoid the power cord.
So it's impossible to have no wires anywhere.
That is true. You
but
are
you
always
can-
going to have the power cord.
You can tuck a cable going to a subwoofer quickly underneath some trim, underneath the carpet, something.
yeah.
There's always ways to make that disappear quickly.
But my honest answer of what I think will make you happiest, it is perfectly appropriate for your room size, and what I think will look nice and be something that you could convince your significant other is not an eyesore and makes a lot of sense, would be a pair of SVS SB-2000s.
Yeah, the sealed ones are smaller.
The sealed ones, they're certainly bigger than the sub you got now.
Oh, yeah.
Make no mistake about that.
Yeah,
but compared to the enormous size of the ported ones, they're much more compact. You can get them glossy and pretty.
Yes.
You've got plenty of placement opportunities. You can do diagonally opposite corners in here. You could do front wall, back wall, slightly offset. You've got lots of opportunities where you could place them. Yeah, SB-2000s, they have appropriate output levels, great extension, good for this room size, and the price makes sense too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
we're making it all fit into this budget that you mentioned. You know, to me, part of the aesthetic of a theater room is stuff like speakers. The room is a theater. You know, you already have theater seats and a projector screen and a projector on the ceiling.
SB-2000s, along with the theater recliners you already have, they look fantastic.
It would look fantastic. And so, you know, the room is already not a formal living room.
No,
it's already a theater, right? So it's not like you make it look bad if you get 2 bigger subwoofers. Yeah, I think that's a great recommendation.
But they're still quite compact cubes. Again, they can be glossy and pretty. Yeah.
Now, also, he's up for a new projector. Could a new projector be a possibility over his current Epson? He has the 8350 right now on that 135-inch screen. Are we still talking that's got to fit in the 5,000?
Yeah. The budget is $5,000. Yeah. So it's a little bit challenging. So what's the? I see. It annoys me because SVS they only show the prices for the country that you're in. So,
can I quickly find that?
Can you quickly look up how much dual SB2000s cost? I think it's around $1,500 for the duals. It's somewhere in that vicinity.
I'll see how quickly I can find such a thing. Let's see. Come on,
I'm going to assume around there. Plus, let's say he gets the AV receiver. That's another $500. About $2,000.
It's showing $700 each. I'm trying to find a place where I can buy two at once.
Yeah, it should be right on the actual page. It should say "Go Duals."
Oh, okay.
Plus however many dollars.
Yeah, go dual and save $100. So you would add $600.
Okay,
so they're essentially $650 a
okay,
piece.
$1,300.
Yeah.
So $1,300, $1,800 if you also get the AV receiver. Okay, now if you got the projector, you're probably looking at the 50-50 UB.
Yeah.
Sticking with Epson. It's going to fit where you've already mounted your current one. It's going to give you the wobble K. It's going to give you the HDR. It's going to give you the wide color. It's going to be awesome. But that is going to be about $2,700, which means we've left you quite little for your acoustic treatments, and you need them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be a bit iffy.
It's like, what's his biggest problem? His biggest problem right now is the uneven bass.
It's the subs, and you got to get some room treatments.
It's the subs and room treatment. So you
do
put
those
the
first.
There. Yeah, do absolutely.
And then maybe you got to save up another $500 to $700 to get the projector.
Yeah, yeah.
But that can be a nice treat when it comes.
Yeah, right. So that's the
subs
order.
And acoustic treatments first. Do that.
Yeah, that's the order to do it. And don't be afraid to make your own room treatments. And what company was that will print a picture of yours and you can make some room treatment in a very pretty art?
So if you just want to get the fabric, because you are doing DIY, so like GiK will print images on their panels. So if you're buying already finished panels from GiK, you can get them there. Acoustimac will also print images on panels, fully finished panels.
Okay.
But if you're doing DIY and you just want to get fabric that you are going to wrap around your own made panels and you want images printed on those, My Fabric Designs is the place to go.
There we go. Okay. Well, there you go. I mean, I'd go for it myself. Here we go. We're moving on to another question.
You're sticking around longer than I thought you were able.
Yeah, I think we can definitely do Jeff's question.
All right, sounds good. Great.
For sure. Jeff G has some questions for us, I think he has questions, although I only see a question mark at the very end. Jeff wrote to us several months back in episode 586. What episode are we on right now, Rob?
615.
615.
Like half a year ago.
My goodness. Okay. So episode 586, he wrote to us. He was considering upgrading his Epson 5020 UB projector, which still looks lovely, to a 4K model. And he had a $5,000 budget. We said that if he was willing to wait, it'd probably be a good idea to see what Cydia 2018 would bring. We were expecting a new Epson model to replace the 5040 UB. And we figured JVC and Sony would have new models, which might not fit his $5,000 budget, but they'd push down prices of the then current models like the JVC X790. So it's after Cydia.
It is.
And Jeff's back. And our predictions appear to have been pretty accurate. How about that? The X790, aka RS540, is now $4,000 brand new. And the Epson TW9400 was announced at IFA, so we'd assume a 5050 UV and a 6050 UV will be coming to North America.
I'm still shocked it hasn't been announced, but whatever.
I know.
Waiting on certification or something, I think.
But those new JVC models, true 4K resolution, no more wobble K, auto tone mapping for HDR, see, smarter display, faster HDMI handshaking. It looks as though the $6,000 NX5, aka RS1000, has lower contrast and not as deep black levels as the now $4,000 X790. But the $8,000 NX7, aka RS2000, pretty much has it all. So help Jeff decide, what projector should he buy? Are we still on the $5,000 budget is the first question.
Well, do you want to spend $8,000?
I mean, the fact that he listed it makes it seem like he's open to the idea.
Well, I mean, I guess the real question is, what are the differences between the $4,000 X790 and the $8,000 NX7?
There you go.
Right?
And so is it twice as good?
Right, yeah. Is it twice the price good? The differences are the genuine 4K panel in the NX7 versus the 1080p panel that's being wobbled in the X790.
All right.
To me, that is not worth any more money at all.
Huh.
I mean, I'm sure if you put up computer text with a really small font, yes, you can see the difference. But I just don't care about that. The contrast and black levels are very, very comparable between the two. So that's good. Light output level, very, very comparable between the two. So the faster HDMI handshaking, it's really annoying on the X790 if you switch sources. I mean, it is like a ridiculous 25 to 30 second delay. It's crazy.
What?
I don't know. I don't know why it takes so long.
Now, you mean switching sources on the projector, or do you mean anytime you switch sources through your amplifier?
Anytime you switch sources, because it's doing a new handshake, right?
It's that slow.
So you go from watching cable to going to your Blu-ray player. It's like a 30-second blanking until it's handshaking.
Dude, I can check like 5 Facebook notifications in that amount of time.
So, I mean, yeah, it's really annoying. But there's plenty of situations and setups where, yeah, it's a minor annoyance, but you can totally live with it for $4,000.
For $4,000, yeah, I could.
So that's a give or take. I can't imagine it's actually worth $4,000 to you. So it comes down to the NX7 can do the auto tone mapping for HDR, but that's not tone mapping on the fly. That's just, it reads the HDR10 metadata and it goes, okay, this is a 1,000 nit movie, so I use this tone curve. This is a 4,000 nit movie, so I use this tone curve. This is a 10,000 nit movie, so I use this different tone curve. But it still only sets the tone curve once, and it keeps it for the entire movie, and not all movies are properly encoded. It does give you the ability to manually change the tone curve, and that could be really valuable, but what if you just spent $500 on a Panasonic Ultra HD Blu-ray player instead of $4,000 on a higher-end projector, and you let the player do the tone mapping before it ever gets to your projector?
That's sort of what we were talking about earlier. You can put that function in the player.
So honestly, Jeff, I have a really tough time saying you should spend $4,000 more. Now, if you've got tens of thousands of dollars lying around, and you're like, $8,000, I don't care, here's pocket change, then yeah, get the better NX7. Why the heck not? If for the faster HDMI switching, if nothing else. But I think money is still somewhat of an object.
Yeah.
It's really hard to justify.
Yeah, if your budget is still $5,000 and that jump to $8,000 is a lot to you, don't worry about it.
Because you can get the X790 and the Panasonic Ultra HD Blu-ray player for under $5,000 total.
There you go.
I gotta suggest you do that, Jeff.
It sounds like it's time for him to go ahead and do that. Get the X790, man, and get that Panasonic Blu-ray player. All right, let's see. I probably will need to move on here. How long is this 10th?
Well, you know what? I mean, feel free to hop out. I'll carry on one or two more questions. I'm gonna hang
on. One more question. We can do this, man.
Okay. All right. This is a long one.
Maybe my time is wrong on my computer, but I'm only showing 9:56 p.m. my time. So
it is. I thought you had to go at 9:30. So
no, we're good. We're good right now. Don't you worry about me. Don't you worry about me. Working it out.
Lee likes to be here, folks.
I do.
You see?
I do. I felt bad. Like Tom called me a while back. Like, can you be on the show? Like now? and I was already like doing a thing at the school, already committed to something else, and I felt terrible. So
never feel that way. You're helping us out. We appreciate it.
I feel like this is my podcast. Like it's part of my life. You know, it is. It's a thing I do sometimes, and I like it.
You do.
Okay, but Paul T is the next question that I'm going to hang in here for. First up, Paul says we've made his commute to work much more enjoyable with our information and entertainment. So he's not listening the weeks I'm on. So keep up the good work, he says.
No self-deprecation. You do a fantastic job.
Paul has a 5.2.2 setup. His house is an open floor plan. Again, that's the theme tonight. Big, wide open spaces. So he's dealing with 2,400 square, not cubic, feet.
Ooh, that is a lot of space.
That is. That's pretty much bigger than my house. He saved up for 10 years to replace his Polk speakers with Revel Performa 3 speakers, and he invested in a pair of SVS SB-16 Ultra subs. Nice. His receiver is an Onkyo TX-RZ810, and he has an external amp to power his front towers and center, so the Onkyo is only powering his surrounds and rear height Atmos speakers. He says 80% of his listening is music, and only 20% is movies and TV. About half of his music listening is just casual or in the background, but the other half is dedicated listening time. And while he knows some people might frown upon it, he enjoys using all-channel stereo rather than just 2-channel. You can do whatever you like.
That is entirely okay.
If you like something, you can do it. It's a marathon.
Well, plus, huge space. It could make a lot of sense.
It could.
Yeah.
And if you're enjoying it, and it's not completely destroying the sort of stereo soundstage, as it were, then go for it. Most of his music listening is done via Tidal. He uses the Tidal app that... I'm sorry, did I make a...
It's good, high quality
Oh,
streaming.
yeah. Sure. It's not like it's hurting anything. He uses the Tidal app that's built into his Onkyo receiver at the moment. Could he improve the quality of this source by using an external DAC instead? I seriously doubt it. He was considering... I mean, unless that Onkyo receiver is not getting the full... Like, they do FLAC files equivalent, right? They do lossless.
They do CD quality,
Right, they do lossless. So, I mean, unless it's malfunctioning, an external DAC ain't going to make a bit of difference. He was considering using the optical connection from a Chromecast audio to feed an external DAC from shit or cord. That's the name, y'all.
It's not a swear word. SCHIIT. We're not cussing.
Shit. Or cord, since some of the reviews make it seem like those devices will make a huge difference. But then other write-ups say that they won't make any difference at all. So he doesn't want to spend the money. If it won't be worth it, it won't be. What do we say? I guess I've said what I say.
Yeah, and I agree.
It's not going to make a bit of difference.
Don't spend the money on those. Now, could they make an audible difference? Sure. By messing with the signal.
Yeah. By by doing something to it it's not supposed to. You see, if you receive the data and you decode the data properly, you're done.
Yeah, I mean, this is coming in CD quality, so we're talking 16-bit, 44.1 kilohertz. Yeah. If your digital to analog converter can't handle that, there's some big problems. And believe me, the digital analog converters built into your Onkyo can do that just fine. Also, the Onkyo already has Chromecast built in, so why would an external Chromecast audio possibly make it any better?
This is sort of chasing that unicorn kind of thing. It's not going to get...
This is not the place to try and make an improvement to your sound quality. This is not your limiting factor in your setup.
It's not. Your Onkyo receiver is kicking it.
Oh, yeah.
What about MQA? Oh, Lord. He knows Tidal...
Master Quality Authenticated is what MQA stands for. Master Quality Authenticated, yes.
He knows Tidal supports MQA, of course I do. But neither his Onkyo nor the Chromecast audio support it. Should he look for an external DAC or streaming device that supports MQA? Would that make a worthwhile difference? How loud would you like me to answer?
Not enough to spike the mic.
Okay. No.
No.
Not going to make any difference.
Don't do this.
Not a worthwhile difference. Again, it might make a difference, but it might be messing with the audio. It's not.
It's just...
No, don't do it.
Such a load of hokum.
Yeah.
It's such a load of hokum.
It's so sad. It's so very sad.
There are a number of partners that have network audio players that can do MQA via Tidal. About the only one I might even possibly consider would be the one from NAD. But that's still overpriced. No. It's still totally not worth it. Don't take that as a recommendation. In fact, if you were ever seriously considering, like this is just something you can't get out of your mind. It doesn't matter what AVRant says. You want to try the MQA from Tidal. You know what I'm going to suggest you do? I'm going to suggest you go get yourself an LG V30 phone.
What?
Because the LG V30 phone has the Tidal app that can do MQA. So not only could you listen to that in a portable sense, it can just be a portable player. You don't actually have to make it your phone. But you can also use the micro USB connector to connect it to your AV receiver and feed the MQA signal that the V30 phone is receiving.
Yeah.
Over Wi-Fi with full MQA and everything via the Tidal app that's on the V30 phone, and that can become your player. So if you're going to do anything, I'd do that.
Yeah, because then when you realize it doesn't do anything, you can sell the phone.
Yeah, I mean, don't do it, but if you must, if you won't believe me, then get a V30 phone from LG.
Yeah, it's not a real thing, man. You may as well put the green marker around your CDs. Remember that one? Back in the day? Yeah. Sorry, we're so angry and sarcastic tonight, or at least I am. His Onkyo RZ810 is rated at 130 watts times 7 into 8 ohms, but then the specs mention that is only with 2 channels driven. Yeah, that happens a lot in the way they report specs on receivers.
Pretty normal.
Since he is using the all-channel stereo listening mode, every speaker is playing the full signal. So with his Onkyo powering his surrounds and rear heights 4 speakers, how much power is he actually getting for each of those 4 speakers? Should he get another 2-channel amp so that the Onkyo only has to power 2 speakers on its own? Do they list those specs, or has someone tested that particular receiver to see?
Well, I mean, all of the amplifier channels in that AV receiver are sharing one power supply.
Right.
So there's 2 limiting things. There's how much current then can the power supply deliver, which is then shared by however many active amplifier channels are there, and then how much power is each amplifier channel capable of outputting, like just what is the limit of the transistors on each amplifier channel. So obviously the maximum power that the entire power supply can deliver is greater than what any one amplifier channel can output at a given time. But you still end up being limited overall by how much power can the power supply deliver in total. Okay. So usually there's kind of like a maximum or a peak or a, what do you call it? Like a dynamic peak rating for the amplifier. But when there isn't, usually you can just take about half of the rated power and add that to the standard rated power. And that's usually sort of the dynamic peak power.
Okay.
That can be done. So you're looking at about 190 watts times 2, which ends up being usually about how much in total the power supply can deliver. So it can probably deliver on a continual basis something around 380 watts, which is then divided by however many channels are
4
active.
In his case, right? So 90 watts?
So, yeah, about 90 to 100 watts per channel is probably what it can deliver you. But that's on like a continuous basis.
Yeah, which doesn't really happen.
And even in a really large room, like how far away are these speakers from you? Because these are Revel Performa 3 Series speakers, which are not like crazy efficient, but they're also not crazy inefficient by any means. So unless they're an obscene distance from you, your surround and your rear height speakers, there's no reason to think that like approximately 90 to 100 watts continuous being fed to like... It's producing like around 89, 90 watts, 89 or 90 decibels from 1 meter away with 1 watt. Right. So you can produce something in the order of about 110 decibels from 1 meter away.
That's really loud too. Sitting at home listening.
Continuously?
Yeah.
How loud do you listen, man?
Does it increase the distortion at all to be driving 4 channels instead of 2?
Well, I mean, technically it does. Yeah, measurably it does. But I mean, it can deliver that power.
Yeah.
It can deliver about 90 watts continuously to all 4 of those channels all the time. Yeah. So it's like 110 decibels coming out of those speakers from 1 meter away. I mean, if you're really far away, I guess maybe that's not loud enough, but that seems highly unlikely to me. Also, okay, so you offload 2 of those to a 2-channel external amp, like a 200 watt external amp or something like that, and you gotta... Like, what difference is that really going to make? Like 3 extra decibels?
Yeah, maybe. And that's not very audible.
So my answer is, I mean, my answer to you is don't buy any of the things you were thinking about buying. I mean, really, let's bring it right back to, it sounds like he wants to make an improvement to his sound quality.
You can tell there's something, he's searching for more.
You already bought the speakers.
Right.
You already bought really good subs.
How's the room treated?
The limiting factor in your setup is your room. It really, really is, Paul. I mean, it really, really is. And unfortunately, there probably isn't a heck of a lot you can do about that. Because, you know, it's this wide open floor plan. I doubt you're going to the trouble of constructing walls.
Right.
We talk about room treatments, but those are more of a concern in a small room where you're getting lots of echoes that are happening, you know, close enough to the direct sound that they're smearing your sound in a wide open room.
A big room really does make a crazy slap echo if you have...
You could, yeah, it could be resonating in there for sure.
Right.
And that would be the thing to spend your... Like, just honestly, sit in your seat and clap. One sharp clap.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you hear a zing, if you hear a ring, if you hear reverberation from that clap, then you need to fix that. That is your limiting factor by far. It's not the MQA from Tidal. It's not you're an external DAC. It's not more amplifier power to your rear speakers, your rear height speakers. It's none of those things.
Right, like a previous questioner we had. Maybe you need to talk to GiK.
Very possibly. Yeah. So but it's your room, and unfortunately, a good amount of your room just isn't changeable.
Right. Yeah. But things could be covered to reduce some of these echoes we're talking about. That
yeah, if you got echoes, that's the thing to go after.
Right. Start there. But yeah, don't go looking for magic in these things like MQA. Okay, well, I do think I will leave you at this point. Right. I did go longer than I told you.
And I greatly appreciate it. We all appreciate it. Let's all thank Lee, shall we?
I'll take a bow to no one in the room. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, lamp. Thank you, television. Thank you, door to the bathroom. Thank you. All right, so yeah, I'm going to head on out, and it's been fun, as always.
Fantastic. If folks want to reach you, where can they reach you?
Find me on Twitter. I am at Lee Overstreet. Because I'm Lee Overstreet. So
thank you so much, Lee. We really appreciate it. I'm going to hang around for like 1 or 2 more questions, and then I'll
let you decide how long you want this recording to be.
Who's going to stop me?
So have a good rest of episode, Rob. We'll talk to you later, man.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, Lee. Well, yeah, let's for sure at least do one more, and that'll be Boschko. He is in Canada, and he asks, if you're shopping at Amazon Canada, which banana plugs do we recommend? So we have a few favorites. Tom really likes the GLS locking banana plugs. I very frequently recommend the Strike banana plugs made by Sewell. Both of those are available on Amazon Canada, but not at a particularly great price. It does look like they're importing them from the US, and you're having to pay the cross-border and the conversion fee and that. So they do sell on Amazon Canada Sewell's Deadbolt banana plugs at a very reasonable price, and those were my favorites before the Strike style banana plugs were available. The Strike is a newer model that's more recent, but the Deadbolt banana plugs from Sewell, those used to be my favorites. Those are available at Amazon Canada at a very reasonable price, and for $1 less for the same number of them, there are the Amazon Basics banana plugs, which if you're looking at YouTube, I'm showing some images. Here are the Amazon Basics ones, and here are the Sewell Deadbolt ones, and I'm thinking those are exactly the same. If they're not exactly the same, they're an exceedingly similar design, and the Amazon Basics ones go for $1 less. So I can easily recommend those. They're a nice design. Yeah, $26 for 12 pairs of the Amazon Basics versus $27 if you get the Sewell Deadbolt version. So there you go. Next question from Boschko. We previously talked about either adding a battery backup, a small one, to his existing APC J15 rack-mounted power conditioner. So that is a surge protector and a interference, like a RFI or EMI interference, what would you call it, suppressor. But that's about it. It doesn't do voltage regulation. It doesn't have battery backup. It is rack mountable. So it's surge protection and reduces interference. And I think it's got independent banks, independent filter banks, so that you're not getting like cross contamination from the devices you have plugged into it. 9 outlets on that G5. So he was like, he wants to get some battery backup. He could add a small battery backup unit to the G5, or he could just replace the G5 entirely with, say, an APC J15, which does give you 6 battery backup outlets and 2 surge-only outlets, 8 outlets total. But he's using every single one of the 9 outlets on his G5, so 8 sockets total on the J25 doesn't quite cut it if he just replaces it. So he's wondering what would happen if he went the other way, if he got a battery backup unit and then plugged the G5 into one of the battery backup outlets. Would he then have battery backup for all 9 outlets of his G5? Would it be the same as like plugging his G5 into a wall outlet, but just having a battery in between? Unfortunately, not quite. The current is limited by the battery outlets on any of the units. It's limited to about 12 amps instead of the full 15 amps that would come from the wall outlet. It would function, but yeah, you're asking to now power all of those devices off of the, I mean, it doesn't really matter that you're getting one socket. It's the same as, you know, putting a power strip into the wall outlet. It's one wall outlet socket. All the power is still going through there, but it does choke off the number of amps that can actually get through there. So I can't wholeheartedly recommend that. It seems like you're struggling a bit. Now, one option would be to get the J15. The J15 actually has 12 outlets on it, all of them battery protected, and 2 of them are still the full 15 amps. They're still high current, even though they are battery backup. But of course, now you're looking at about $550 for that J15 unit. So certainly gives you the number of outlets you need, all of them battery backup. It could just replace your G5, gives you voltage regulation, gives you surge protection, gives you RFI, EMI protection. So it does all the things, but it's a pretty hefty price tag. So we're back to sort of the same solutions. I think if you need that many outlets and you only need a few of them to be battery backup, you might still just go back to one of the APC back UPS units. I like the BE750, I think is the model number. Affordable, gives you some battery outlets, 5 of them, I believe. And you could plug that into your G5 or just use it independently. So I think we're back to that original answer there, Boschko. Next question. He has a 75-inch Samsung TV. Didn't say exactly which model, but he says he'd like to calibrate it, but he doesn't want to pay the several $100s to have a professional calibrator come in and do a one-time calibration. So we asked, is there a website where he could go and look up the full calibration settings and just manually plug them all into the TV himself and get a full calibration? Well, there's the basic calibration settings. If you go to like ratings, that's rtings.com. Assuming this is a somewhat recent model, they've probably got the settings for your Samsung TV. They reviewed a lot of Samsung TVs, so there's a high likelihood they have. So if you look at their TV reviews, they have the settings right there next to them. And for all your basic settings, so your contrast, brightness, your basic color tint setting, and most of the advanced settings, turning off your dynamic contrast and things like that, you can do all of that, plug in those, and those will work fine. The problem is what a professional calibrator would do with their measurement tools is measure the specific color values, grayscale value, gamma value of your particular TV. And those things vary on a unit by unit basis, which is why you have to measure them. Ratings usually does mention the full, like if you have a full color management system where you're actually the individual red, green, and blue and cyan, yellow, and magenta points that you can adjust. They usually do actually list all of those things, but they give the warning, it only applies to the set that they calibrated, the one that they had in their room, not the one you have in your room. You can try plugging in those values, but they're just as likely to make the image worse and less accurate. In fact, like statistics-wise, it's probably more likely that you're making your TV less accurate by plugging in the settings for their particular color management system. And again, for the grayscale settings, for the exact gamma settings, you're probably just going to make it worse, not better, because it's unit to unit. So I have zero problem doing the basic calibration settings. Absolutely plug those values in. But for the specific color management and the grayscale and all that, you have to measure. You have to, because it's unit by unit. Thankfully, most of them these days, you put the TV into its cinema mode, and it's pretty close. They'll show you the measurements in the reviews, and the errors are either below the visible threshold or not very much above it. So usually you're pretty darn close. And if anything, they're probably a little bit too blue. So if you want to try something, try reducing the blue value a little bit in your color management system. And that's almost always the case, is that they're a little bit too blue. Last question from Boschko is, do we think the SVS subwoofers, basically like all of them or some specific models, will go on sale again during the holiday shopping season, Black Friday coming up, all the way through like Boxing Day in Canada and that after the holiday weekend? Will they have another offer similar to the 12 NSD series subs that were basically at half price like last year? I really don't think they're going to have more 12 NSDs. I think that was like one last container that came from China and they sold them off because that was a discontinued series replaced by the 2000 series. I don't expect a deal that good again. I'm almost certain they will have another holiday sale. They always do. but I wouldn't expect like half off. I don't think it'll be quite as good a deal as what the 12 NSD series was, because that was kind of like a one last run discontinued series, was selling them off at a fantastic price. Hopefully they prove me wrong. That'd be great, but I don't have any insider info. But I would expect a sale of some kind. They always have a holiday sale. Alrighty, I think we're going to wrap up there. That leaves Ted M and Damien D on our topic list. We'll answer your gentlemen's questions next week. Also did receive questions from Josh T, Michael N, and Sean W. I know for sure I have your emails. So yeah. We're going to go back and thank our listeners of the week for sure. Again, if you'd like to donate, come to avrant.com. Over on the right-hand side, there's the support the podcast links over there. Don't know who donated via PayPal this week. We'll be sure to mention your name next week when Tom is back and he lets me know who's on that list. But you can also financially support the podcast at patreon.com/AVRant podcast. It's an automatic monthly donation. We have 75 patrons over there. One of them is Mark R. And thank you so much for being supporters financially of the podcast. Also going to thank Infinite Gary for talking us up to Blue Jeans cable when he ordered some Belden speaker wire. So that's fantastic. I want to make sure we thank again Lee Overstreet, pinch hitting on very short notice. That was great of him. So huge thanks to Lee, as always great when he stops by. So for AVRant and on behalf of Tom Andry, I'm Rob H. Now go out and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.